everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
Frieren, Infinite Cheats Across Anime Worlds. Chapter 65 to 80, Chapter 65, The King and His Mount. At that moment, the 4 black wolves had the 2 foxes surrounded, growling out a threat. Wind foxes, surrender quietly. Your kin are all but wiped out, there's no chance left for you. As monsters, they typically communicated through telepathy. This ability was useful for keeping their voices from carrying to others during a fight. Hearing the threat, the 2 wind foxes bared their teeth at once, their eyes burning with sheer defiance, not a hint of surrender in sight. As one of the ruling powers of this local forest, they had never once bowed down before. If not for these underhanded fawn wolves striking in the chaos, they never would have been driven into such a wretched state. In the fighting before this, they'd cut down the better part of 100+ fawn wolves, leaving only these 4. But by the same token, the wind foxes had also burned through everything they had, now caught in a desperately dangerous spot. The wind fox king dragged his wounded paws forward, taking one hard, labored step ahead. Though his body was drenched in blood, his fur dyed a deep red all over, his presence hadn't dimmed one bit. He lowered his voice, roaring with grim resolve. Don't get your hopes up, fawn wolves. As king, I will never back down. Come at me together if you dare. Even as he said this, he'd already braced himself to send his child away. Even if this comes down to a fight to the death, I won't let these fawn wolves walk away unscathed. Magicules surged around him. He exchanged a glance with his wife beside him, ready to unleash every last bit of strength in one final stand. Seeing this, the 4 fawn wolves' expressions turned grim, a full-scale clash about to erupt. But right at that tense moment, rustle. The bushes parted gently, and Ronan stepped out from within. He looked at the standoff between the 2 groups of monsters, his expression calm, entirely unmoved, and walked straight toward the wind foxes. The sudden appearance of a human startled both sides. Especially the wind fox king. The moment he saw Ronan approaching him directly, he immediately bared his fangs in a display of intimidation, a low growl rumbling from his throat, trying to scare the man off. Ronan, however, completely ignored the threat, his stride not faltering for even a moment as he closed the distance. The wind fox king sensed trouble, and instinctively took half a step back. Realizing the human was heading straight for him, he hastily scooped up his cub, set it on his wife's back, and barked out an order. Run! He himself lunged at Ronan without a second thought, trying to buy his wife and child whatever time they needed to escape. TCH. Ronan shook his head slightly at the sight, thinking that the monsters of this world had a far better character than the ones the goddess had created. He casually reached out and pinned the wind fox king to the ground, as easily as scooping up a kitten. The wind fox king thrashed wildly, all 4 limbs flailing, letting out furious snarls, but he couldn't break free of Ronan's grip no matter how hard he struggled. He tried to bite at Ronan, only for a hand to press his head firmly back down. Don't move. His face pressed into the dirt, the wind fox king then heard an easy, casual voice above him. I'm here to help you. Not sure if you can understand me, but if you can, stay still. The moment those words landed, as if carrying some invisible force behind them, the wind fox king genuinely stopped struggling. It wasn't that he trusted this human, it was that he could feel the overwhelming strength radiating off the man. Someone that strong could kill him without a second thought. There was no reason to lie to him at all. Ronan seemed satisfied with the wind fox king's response. Good. He gave a casual wave, and a gentle surge of power flowed into the wind fox king's body, instantly healing every one of his wounds. Across from them, the 4 fawn wolves watched the scene unfold, their eyes filled with unmistakable wariness. They could clearly sense the wind fox king's strength had been restored to his peak. What is even happening here? What is this human trying to do? Why save him? Damn it. We were this close to killing them and taking their territory for ourselves. Human. A voice, dripping with unconcealed fury, exploded directly inside Ronan's head. Ronan turned his head, giving the wolves a longer look, genuinely surprised these monsters were capable of telepathy at all. Listening to the Fang wolves accuse him, arguing that a human had no business interfering in a conflict between monsters, Ronan smiled. He released his grip on the Wind Fox King, and shook his head lightly. Humans are humans precisely because we stand at the top of the food chain. So why exactly would we bother following rules made by animals? At those words the Fang wolves fell silent, unable to argue, resentment burning uselessly in their chests. Then they watched as the Wind Fox King advanced on them, step by step, a savage look spreading across his face. The sight was like watching someone long oppressed finally get the chance to turn the tables and gloat. Despair welled up in the four Fang wolves. Knowing full well they were no match for the Wind Fox King at full strength, and with a human standing by, watching with predatory interest. They bolted without hesitation, fleeing deeper into the forest, desperate for any sliver of a chance at survival. Seeing this, a flash of ruthlessness crossed the Wind Fox King's eyes. He set his paws lightly against the air, and with a gust of wind, launched himself upward, riding the currents as he gave chase. Ronan crossed his arms, watching the whole thing play out in silence. He'd assumed the fox would be back soon enough, but time passed, and there was no sign of him. Not knowing exactly what had happened, Ronan didn't dwell on it either, simply treating it as a minor diversion. After all, he'd given the fox his chance. He turned and continued deeper into the forest with Frieren and Shizue Izawa. Just then, whoosh! A rush of wind cut through the air behind them. Ronan turned to look, and there was the Wind Fox King, soaked in blood, returning. On his back rode two foxes, his wife and child. I see. Looking at the blood covering the Wind Fox King, and the two foxes riding on his back, Ronan understood everything at once. Judging by the blood, the Wind Fox King had likely charged straight into the Fang wolf's den, and settled the day's score in full. Quite the bloodthirsty spirit for a fox. He'd assumed the Wind Fox King had come back to beg him to heal his wife and child. Ronan wouldn't have minded that either, it was nothing more than a flick of the fingers to him. But instead, the Wind Fox King immediately dropped to his knees, striking a pose of absolute, unconditional devotion. Thank you, my lord, for your healing. You've settled a debt I could never have repaid on my own. I have nothing left to offer you in return. I know this might sound abrupt, but might I ask, does my lord happen to be in need of a mount? With his wife's injuries still fairly severe, the Wind Fox King simply couldn't think of any other meaningful way to repay Ronan. As a monster, having a human help him even once was already an immeasurable act of grace. Asking for a second favor would surely come across as pushing his luck. So, weighing his options, he had only one card left to offer himself. His kin were all but wiped out anyway, as a fox with nowhere left to call home, this was really his only remaining choice. Having said his piece, the Wind Fox King held his breath, waiting quietly for Ronan's answer. The air seemed to grow heavier in that moment. Ronan fell silent for a beat, a flicker of realization crossing his eyes. A mount, right, how did I forget about that? This was another world, after all, he really ought to ride a dragon or something at some point. No dragon on hand right now, but... well, a big fox volunteering himself wasn't bad either. Loyal to the bone. Underscore 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 underscore. Since today, August 17th, is my country's Independence Day, I've created a discount code for my Patreon members. Please use the code below to get a 17% discount. Chapter 66, Naming, Kyubi. 1,443 words. Ronan took in the Wind Fox King as his own. Though through further conversation he learned that the fox's self-proclaimed title of king was just that, a self-appointed title, not an actual demon lord species. Still, the abilities he'd shown were more than enough to satisfy Ronan. Meanwhile, the Wind Fox King's wife and child naturally pledged their loyalty as well. A family, after all, ought to stay together. Ronan healed both foxes, mending their wounds, then rinsed them off with a touch of water magic afterward. He studied the Wind Fox King and asked, "So I suppose it's time to give you all names. Do you have one already?" The Wind Fox King shook his damp fur, sending droplets scattering everywhere. At Ronan's question, he lifted his head, hesitated a moment, then answered, "No, but, Master. As a human, isn't it a bit reckless of you to be naming monsters like us? What if?" "There's no what if." Ronan cut him off, well aware of what the Wind Fox King was worried about. Humans, after all, carried very little magicules in their bodies. Name a monster carelessly, and at best you'd end up with a shortened lifespan and a debilitating illness, at worst, sudden, fatal collapse on the spot. But he was different. At this, Ronan nodded, though he found himself stuck. He wasn't exactly gifted when it came to naming things. In theory, this was a Western fantasy world, so any name ought to fit that kind of aesthetic. But if the name was too long, too complicated, he'd never remember it himself, which would only make things awkward down the line. Besides, he wasn't even sure yet whether he'd end up keeping other pets in the future. After a moment's thought, Ronan decided to draw inspiration from anime he'd watched in his old life. Looking at the Wind Fox King, that coat of golden yellow fur, a name suddenly flashed through his mind. "And so, you'll be QB." Ronan nodded, satisfied, feeling the name suited him well, striking and memorable. At the name, QB froze for a moment. Then, a soft light surged across his entire body, and a massive wave of magicules crashed over him like a roaring tide. Ronan could feel, clearly, a significant amount of energy being drawn out of his own body. But the sensation lasted only an instant before fading, his own reserves quickly settling back to their usual calm. Just as he'd suspected. Ever since arriving in this world, perhaps around the same time he'd gained his skills, his body had already begun to change somehow. He'd become able to hold magicules, just like the other visitors from other worlds. It seemed his infinite mana advantage was finally about to pay off. Ronan's gaze drifted to the fox mother and cub, and his thoughts turned to Frieren. While QB was still mid-evolution, he turned to Frieren and asked, "Interested in adopting one?" "Perfect timing too, 3 foxes, 1 for each of you." Perhaps it was fate, the Wind Fox family, 2 adults and a cub, lined up exactly with the 3 of them. Frieren blinked, caught off guard, and a flicker of complicated feeling crossed her eyes. She'd never owned a pet before, let alone a monster. Even though the monsters of this world were different from the ones she knew, some part of her still instinctively resisted the idea of adopting one. Just then, QB's wife, hearing Ronan's words, turned her head toward them. She gave her cub a gentle lick, then spoke directly and sincerely through telepathy. "It would be an honor. If Master is willing to take us in, I will do everything in my power to support Lady Frieren. My child will do the same." Most monsters thought in simple, straightforward terms. In their eyes, whoever saved them was their benefactor, and pledging loyalty in return was only natural. Ronan nodded, pleased, approving of her attitude. He turned back to Frieren and asked again, "So, what do you think?" Frieren fell silent for a moment and in the end decided to accept. She came up with a name for the mother fox, though it was left to Ronan to actually bestow it, since he was the one who'd saved the family. The cub's name followed the same process. A little later. Ren and Shizu, then. Hearing the 2 foxes' names, Ronan suddenly suspected Frieren might be just as bad at naming things as he was. Single-syllable names were easy to remember, sure, but hardly distinctive. Also, was the little fox cub male or female? He took a closer look. Female. Good, no issue there then. With the names bestowed, light surged across all 3 Wind Foxes' bodies as their evolution began. The Wind Fox King's transformation was by far the most dramatic. His body, originally 5 feet long, suddenly stretched out to 9 feet, and the single tail he'd once had split into 9. Fluffy and thick, they swayed gently in the breeze. Ronan watched, a little startled. It was just a name. How had that literally turned him into a Ninetales? Thinking back carefully over what he knew about naming and evolution, it clicked into place. When bestowing a name, the recipient's transformation would shift according to the giver's own intentions. For genderless beings like demons or elemental spirits, the one giving the name could even determine their sex during evolution. At the thought, Ronan didn't hesitate. He pulled up the modifier and directly adjusted Kyuubi's total magical reserve. What followed was a startling transformation. Kyuubi grew larger still, visibly, right before their eyes, the swelling magicules around him sending nearby monsters scattering in every direction. At the same time, an unbroken stream of the voice of the world rang out again and again inside his head. By the time the announcements finished, he'd successfully evolved into a demon lord species, standing among the very apex of monster kind. The sudden, overwhelming change left Kyuubi, already giddy from evolving in the first place, utterly stunned. Clearly, nothing like this had ever happened to him before. In the span of mere minutes, he'd leapt past an achievement most monsters could never reach in an entire lifetime. It took him a long moment to gather himself, and when he finally looked at Ronan again, his eyes were full of gratitude. Boom! His now 20-foot-long body dropped into a kneel, the sheer mass of him like a small mountain, shaking the ground beneath. His voice came low and reverent. "Thank you, Master, for the name. I am deeply grateful. From this day forward, I shall serve with everything I have." Ronan felt little about the whole thing, simply giving a light nod. "No need to make a fuss over it. Since you've claimed me as your master, I won't shortchange you in return." With that, Ronan gave the same treatment to Kyuubi's wife and child. Because of how the naming had gone, their tails hadn't multiplied, but their total magical reserves had shot up considerably regardless. Ronan swung himself up onto Kyuubi's back and pointed forward. "Let's go. Take me to whatever races around here you think we could actually talk to. I intend to grant them a transformation of their own. While we're at it, fill me in on the balance of power around here. How long have you lived in this place? Not every race here would make a good fit for migration. This world had no shortage of viciously hostile species, and there was no reason to burden himself, or waste resources, taking any of them in. Goblins, for instance, were a solid choice. Unlike in other worlds, though not particularly bright, they weren't especially aggressive, and didn't harbor much hostility toward humans. Living out something close to a slave's existence here, versus taking a real shot at a future in the goddess's world, the choice seemed obvious enough. Also, Ronan recalled that some female goblins apparently grew up to be quite easy on the eyes. Even if they never turned out to be of any practical use, having a bit of scenery around wouldn't hurt. With these thoughts in mind, the wind roared past his ears. With a mount to carry him now, Ronan's hands were free, so he pulled out the slime, ready to test just how far Feng Ling Yuying's limits actually went. Underscore 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 underscore. Since today, August 17th, is my country's Independence Day, I've created a discount code for my Patreon members. Please use the code below to get a 17% discount. Chapter 67, Chapter 67, Evolving to Michael, Lord of Justice, Transformation, Slime Girl. 1,595 words. Meanwhile, on the other side, Siri and Flam drifted through the sky, pressing deeper into the forest. Without a mount, sure, but their pace was hardly slow either. Even so, after a thorough search, they hadn't turned up any suitable creatures. Maybe they'd picked the wrong direction. Siri's brow furrowed, a flicker of irritation in her expression, and she let out a cold tch. Good thing time wasn't in short supply, she wasn't in any hurry. Just as she thought this, a rustling commotion reached her ears. Looking out from high above, some tens of kilometers off, a disturbance had broken out. A great flock of birds burst into flight all at once, as if startled by something. At the sight, Ciri's gaze sharpened and she took off toward it at speed, flam in tow. Once they landed, they found a magic circle. The circle bore a strong resemblance to the one Leon had used to summon Shizue Izawa, though with some fairly noticeable differences. Something else got summoned here. Ciri murmured to herself, puzzled. Since there was no sign of whoever had been summoned, she decided she'd ask the demon lord about it once they got back. Might well be his doing, this time too. With that, she began searching the area for clues. And, while she was at it, decided to simply wait and watch, letting whatever races were drawn in by the commotion come to her. The Demon Realm. Listening to Kyubi's account of the forest and the surrounding area, Ronan fell into a brief silence. He'd assumed this continent was reasonably peaceful. He hadn't expected it to actually border the demon realm, home to the demon race. Leon's existence served as both ruler and guardian here. Kyubi had personally witnessed, more than a few times, Leon confronting demons head-on and forcing their submission. It was precisely because of Leon's protection that this forest had managed to stay stable at all. Otherwise, ever since the death of the Sorcerer King Kazalim 200 years ago, the whole region should have long since collapsed into chaos, if not outright ruin. I see. Ronan nodded, understanding. Then, he stroked the slime resting in his palm, noticeably larger now, and continued questioning Kyubi. So how old are you, exactly? And who's this Kazalim? Was he the one who ruled this land 200 years ago? Kyubi gave a thorough explanation, though he admitted he didn't know all that much about events 200 years back. He himself was only 100 years old this year. Kazalim had been the demon lord 200 years ago. The golden city of El Dorado, wealthy as it was back then, had suffered terribly under his rule. Leon, still a hero at the time, had defeated Kazalim and settled down here afterward. Within a few years, he'd abandoned his title as hero and become a demon lord himself. Everyone had braced for brutal tyranny, but instead, he'd left things mostly alone, only occasionally putting orcs to work mining gold, with everything else running as it always had. The environment had actually improved a fair amount because of it. Demon raids stopped altogether, and no other demon lords bothered targeting them anymore. Because Leon was simply too strong. Hearing all this, Ronan reflected privately that his earlier read on Leon's character had, indeed, been on the mark. Right then. Squelch. The wet, squishing sound of the slime pulled Ronan out of his thoughts. He deactivated Fengling Yuing, and watched as the slime slowly shifted into a humanoid form. Through his modifications, it had spontaneously gained skills like transformation, magic sense, and telepathy. Its intelligence had awakened. The voice of the world hadn't been disrupted by any of this, which meant even a boost gained through outside intervention was still recognized by this world's own rules. There might well be an ultimate skill out there somewhere, something like a king of creation. Quite the useful discovery, all things considered. The slime turned into a slime girl, then reverted back into its slime form a moment later. It settled obediently onto Ronan's lap and Ronan, meanwhile, quietly upgraded his own unique skill, the Justice, into Michael, Lord of Justice. Instantly, the voice of the world rang out in Ronan's mind. Confirmed. Ultimate skill Michael, Lord of Justice acquired successfully. For whatever reason, this world kept giving Ronan the same feeling he'd get playing a video game, just with a bit more weight to it, more real. Ronan looked over the authorities that came with Michael, Lord of Justice. Michael, Lord of Justice accelerated thought, a universal perception, spatial dominion, hero's domineering aura, angelic legion, all creation, mental domination, absolute defense. 1 2 3 4 8 abilities. Not bad. Since all creation was a knowledge-type skill with built-in analysis, Ronan quickly grasped the details of each ability. The upgraded accelerated thought could push perception speed up to 1,000,000 times normal. Used at full power, time would appear to stop entirely. Honestly, this blew Fengling Ying's own acceleration function completely out of the water. Universal perception meant exactly what it said on the tin, and spatial dominion the same, letting him freely traverse any space he'd already been to, and occasionally lock others out of manipulating space entirely. As for Hero's domineering aura, it looked like a hero-exclusive skill, but wasn't, really. It granted the ability to influence the physical world through sheer presence alone. The effect resembled Conqueror's Haki, more or less, except stronger, and with far greater reach. The last three, Angelic Legion, Mental Domination, and Absolute Defense, were the true authority of Michael, Lord of Justice. The former could summon a legion of angels capable of annihilating anything in their path. The latter could only be countered by another ultimate skill. Absolute Defense, by comparison, was the least impressive of the bunch. Feng Ling Yuing already came with built-in damage immunity, so this was more redundancy than anything. Still, better than nothing. Ronan let his mind wander, deciding that once everyone regrouped, he'd upgrade Flam's merciful skill as well. He hadn't done anything about it earlier, mainly out of concern for system compatibility. Without magicules in the body, none of it would work anyway. Master. Right then, QB's voice pulled Ronan back from his thoughts. QB gestured toward a cluster of thatched roof buildings below, and offered a serious suggestion. We've reached the goblin village. Would you like me to go down and intimidate them a bit first? Also, if I recall correctly, there's a winged race living somewhere nearby as well. Word has it, a few hundred years back, when the queen of the Skywing nation of Fulbrosia passed away, some of her people were purged for political reasons and exiled out here. Of course, that's just second-hand rumor. I can't really vouch for how true it is. Because of his preconceived trust in Leon, QB didn't assume every other demon lord out there was necessarily evil. Ronan, though, wasn't so sure about that. Still, dealing with the goblins came first, so he didn't dwell too much on the matter for now. That said, the rules of this world held that anyone who declared themselves a hero would find cause and effect attaching itself to them, drawing them into tangled webs of fate with demon lords, one way or another. And so. Meanwhile, in the Skywing Nation, the weather was calm and clear. The capital, Gia. In a Western-style office near the edge of a cliff. Fry looked over intelligence her subordinates had stolen from Demon Lord Clayman, her expression turning noticeably heavy. Some of her people wanting to rebel was one thing, but reaching out to those exiled by her mother's own hand, all those years ago, to expose the truth of what had happened back then. She crumpled the letter in her hand, knuckles white with the grip, murmuring to herself. The golden city of El Dorado, huh? Humph. Hiding out there this whole time, no wonder we never found them, even after all these centuries. Demon Lord Clayman, no telling whether this information is even real. Whatever. Real or not, these people all need to die regardless. The truth of how I killed my mother to take the throne can never get out. Leah. She called for her secretary, paused, and then, her expression giving nothing away, gave her order. I'll be leaving the country for a while soon, to take care of something. Everything here is in your hands while I'm gone. I should be back in about a week. Remember, no one is to know I've left the country. Leah wielded transformation magic, and her name, too, had been personally bestowed by Fry, which was exactly why Fry trusted her so completely. If the stakes weren't so high, if letting outsiders handle it didn't risk exposing the secret, she'd have simply hired some mercenary band and been done with it. But unfortunately, this was the golden city of El Dorado, Demon Lord Leon's own territory. Which meant this one, she'd have to handle herself. To make absolutely sure there'd be no loose ends left behind. Underscore 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 underscore. I have finished translating this novel. If you want to read ahead, join my Patreon below, and don't forget to use the code from the previous chapter to get a 17% discount. Chapter 68, Chapter 68, Goblins. 1,470 words. Time slipped by steadily, and by the time Fry made her move, Ronan had already finished bringing the goblins under his wing. Of course, before all this, everything Ronan knew about goblins had come from the Slime King's exploits, set in the Great Forest of Jura. What habits the goblins here in El Dorado actually had, he still had no idea. To head off any trouble in advance, to avoid ending up with a case of harsh land breeds wicked folk, Ronan issued an order. Search this whole village for anything connected to humans, including human bones. If the count turned out to exceed a certain threshold, well, then there'd be no reason to keep this village around at all. He had no interest in taking in creatures outright hostile to humans. And so, QB's keen sense of smell finally came in handy. Before long, he really did turn up a few skeletons. At first glance these skeletons looked human, but on closer inspection, clearly weren't. No human had ever grown a pair of wings from their back. Ronan's brow furrowed, and his mind flashed back to QB's earlier description of the winged race. Demi-humans, probably. Just then, the frail, withered old goblin chieftain seemed to sense something was wrong, lifting his head slightly. The moment his clouded eyes fell on the village's greatest secret, dug up by a human, his heart went cold as ash. His body trembled uncontrollably, and he slowly lowered his head again, seeing nothing but darkness ahead. It's over. Those were the bones of the Hawkfolk and the winged race. A few years ago, when the two tribes had fought each other, a handful of their severely wounded had, by sheer misfortune, ended up dropping nearby. Goblins might be weak, but they knew how to seize an opportunity. The weapons and magic crystals carried by both tribes were worth a great deal. So back then, when the chieftain had still been young, he'd taken them down through ambush. The weapons and crystals had sold for a fortune, enough to build the village and feed the children. The bones, too hard to burn, had been buried deep beneath their own land. He'd assumed this secret would stay buried forever, lost to time. Never expected someone to actually dig it up today. The chieftain pressed himself to the ground, his body trembling harder than before. He silently prayed no hawkfolk or winged scout happened to be nearby. But unfortunately, that prayer was doomed from the start. QB hadn't bothered concealing himself in the slightest while flying. As a monster himself, that kind of brazen intrusion into another's territory could easily be read as a declaration of war. So both the Hawkfolk and the winged race's lookouts had seen the whole thing, plain as day. The two tribes reacted differently on the surface, but the same thought flashed through both their minds. There is no way these goblins are getting off easy. Their own warriors' remains, held by nothing more than a lowly goblin tribe, crystals stripped, bodies desecrated on top of it. Stolen or simply scavenged, it made no difference. Either way, it was an unforgivable disgrace to both the Hawkfolk and the winged race alike. Ronan had no idea what was going through any of these monsters' heads. Right now, he stood quietly before the remains, reading through them clearly with all creation. He learned that every single one of these bodies had been killed by one and the same person. He understood the village's current situation in an instant. Not bad. Takes some nerve. Ronan nodded. Then his gaze swept over the surrounding goblins, and he asked, "Who killed these?" For a goblin, low intelligence, instinct-driven creatures, turning a blade on someone far stronger was rare enough to call once in 10,000. But with QB standing right there, the goblins were too terrified to so much as breathe, let alone answer Ronan's question. Seeing this, Ronan waved a hand, signaling QB to rein in his overwhelming presence. QB understood, and the demonic aura around him slowly receded. Then, one aging, decrepit goblin stepped forward with great difficulty. Ronan narrowed his eyes. "So it was you. Shame. You're about to die." Blunt and harsh as the words were, they were nothing short of the truth. Several goblins lifted their heads, teeth clenched, though none dared make a sound. The goblin chieftain leaned heavily on his ragged cane, offering a weak, bitter smile. "You're not wrong. Our lifespan tops out around 20 years, and I'm already 19 this year. Barring anything unusual, I won't live to see this winter. But even so, I have to ask you, a master over demon lords, why would someone like you take interest in weak little goblins like us?" Anyone watching the dynamic between Ronan and QB could see clearly who held the dominant position. That was exactly what had been troubling the chieftain all along. To him, it was as absurd as some backwater villager suddenly catching the attention of the wealthiest men in the world. Ronan glanced at him and replied evenly. There's no grand reason. It's just that you're easy to manage. That's all. Now that you know those bones aren't human, that's all that matters. Gather your people and come with me. I can't promise you wealth or glory, but climbing out of your current state of poverty and weakness, that I can manage. Of course, the condition is, you'll have to work. There was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. Doubts or not, the chieftain had no other option left. Before long, after testing every last one of the village's 100+ goblins and confirming none had been missed, Ronan took the whole tribe with him. All children, huh? Fine, even better, children are far simpler than adults. A little later, Ronan looked over the numbers Kyubi had tallied up and nodded lightly. The situation fit well enough with goblins standing among the forest's creatures. Their short lifespans meant correspondingly high fertility. But in this particular forest, most of them were nothing but small fry. A single skirmish was often enough to wipe out an entire generation, leaving a gap behind. Give it a few more years and they'd probably end up looking just like the goblin tribes over in the great forest of Jura. Once he'd gotten a full picture of the situation, Ronan handed the related matters off to the staff Leon had sent to assist. A little later, he left Frieren and Shizue behind to handle the naming, and headed back into the forest once more. This time, though, he didn't go deep. He stopped at a certain spot and simply stood, watching quietly. Right then, a creature with a bird's head and a human body shot out of the trees at high speed. It arrived before Ronan in the blink of an eye, dropping into a respectful half-kneel, its voice booming. May I ask, my lord, why you chose to save those goblins? They're the lowest tier of monster there is. If it's help you need, we hawkfolk would be glad to assist. The hawkfolk had always been fierce warriors, with little patience for roundabout pleasantries. But they also understood full well, as the master of Kyubi, Ronan was someone they could never afford to provoke. So the plan was to feel him out indirectly, cozying up to him on one hand, while pursuing revenge against the winged race on the other. That war from a few years back had never truly ended. At those words, Ronan mulled it over for a moment. Clearly, he hadn't expected these monsters to be quite this direct, dropping into a full bow the moment they arrived. Fixing the hawkman with a steady gaze, he let 2 seconds of silence pass before asking. So what exactly can you offer me? As he spoke to save time, he went ahead and cast a spell of mental domination, ready to gauge the creature's true loyalties and character. And then, he watched the hawkman's body shudder involuntarily, spilling out a whole string of confessed crimes. Eating people, killing people, in short, sins beyond any hope of forgiveness. Along with that, Ronan also learned the man's real motive for approaching him, to use his power as a weapon to wipe out the winged race entirely. Hearing this, Ronan's brow furrowed. Kyubi, for his part, was seething with fury. A mere mid-tier magen, and it dared this much. Underscore 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 underscore. I have finished translating this novel. If you want to read ahead, join my Patreon below, and don't forget to use the code from the previous chapter to get a 17% discount. Chapter 69, Angel. 1,432 words. You bastard. Kyubi's massive claw swung without a moment's hesitation. Boom. Like a thunderclap, the raw power of a demon lord species detonated in an instant. The hawkman didn't even get the chance to react before he was torn apart in a burst of gore, not a scrap of him left behind. The sheer suddenness of it sent a chill rippling through the air around them. Meanwhile, not far off in the trees, hidden members of the winged race watched the whole thing unfold with perfect clarity, and their blood ran cold on the spot. Honestly, no creature with wings could have watched that and stayed unmoved. Run. But then. Just as he readied himself to flee, QB's gaze suddenly snapped toward his hiding spot, sharpening once more. Then, baring his teeth, he growled viciously. "Master, should I grab him? These bastards actually dared to try and use you, utterly shameless, unbelievably bold." QB's temper hadn't fully settled yet. As far as he was concerned, the hawkfolk had to be out of their minds. Pulling a stunt like this was no different from an ant trying to boss around a tiger. Ronan, still seated on QB's back, simply waved a hand, signaling he could handle it however he pleased. Just monsters, after all, and if they'd been scheming to use him, with blood already on their hands, they'd better be ready to face the consequences. With his master's permission granted, QB shot up into the air, catching up to his target within moments. Then, "Mercy, mercy, please spare my life." The winged one, realizing there was no escape left, pressed his palms together at once, dropped to his knees, and buried his head between his own legs, his posture as low and submissive as possible, his voice trembling and rushed. "Please forgive me for spying on someone as powerful as you. I was only acting on my tribe's orders. I swear, I never had any hostile intent toward you. Please don't kill me." The hawkman's death had been far too bloody, far too helpless, no one wanted to follow in his footsteps. Of course, the winged one understood exactly who he was dealing with, a demon lord, and demon lords were notoriously fickle. So, he didn't dare lift his head, only kept apologizing, kept bowing, hoping desperately to calm the other party down. At the sight, QB let out a soft, unimpressed grunt. The pleading had dulled a fair amount of the killing intent still simmering in him, and he asked Ronan, his voice cool. "Master, how would you like him handled? He claims he wasn't here to use us. But I don't believe for a second there's a race out there who'd stay indifferent to the power you wield." QB's words cut straight to the point. In the face of such a plain statement of fact, any amount of sweet talk suddenly sounded rather hollow. Ronan considered this for a moment, then reached a decision. Whether or not the winged race actually had ulterior motives, the proper procedure still needed following. A quick spell forced the truth out of him, and Ronan learned that this one, too, had come here for the same reason, the goblins. And though they were technically demon people, their habits mirrored those of demi-humans. Humans weren't on their menu. Once the winged one finished spilling his honest thoughts, he clapped a hand over his own mouth in alarm. His eyes went wide, his whole body trembling, utterly unable to believe what had just happened. Mental domination. Is that how that hawkman died? No wonder. At the thought that he might end up revealing even more secrets, he no longer dared speak above a whisper, hurriedly offering his respect. "Your strength speaks for itself. Even with 10 times the courage, I wouldn't dream of standing against you. Please just let me go, think of me as nothing more than an insignificant ant." Hearing this, Ronan looked down at him from above. "Is that so? Don't you want revenge? Those goblins did kill your kin, after all." Of course he wanted revenge, he simply didn't dare say so, given that the goblins had already sworn themselves to Ronan. He hurriedly insisted the past was the past, that war claimed lives one way or another regardless. Getting killed by goblins, well, that was on his own people's incompetence, nothing more. At this, Ronan smiled. Bending when needed, springing back when possible, rather interesting, this one. He gestured for the man to lift his head. "Good, if you don't want it, all the better. Let's get down to business. Where does your people live? I heard you were exiled from the Skywing Nation a few hundred years back. Is that true? If it was true, then this flock of bird people could be brought into the fold too." Unlike the goblins, they resembled demi-humans in form, and bore a resemblance to the goddess's own image. With a bit of coaxing, who knew, they might even pass for angels. Ronan's thinking was refreshingly simple. The winged one, on the other hand, was thrown completely off balance by the question. He was stunned that a human outsider like Ronan somehow already knew where his people had come from. Did that demon Lord Fox tell him? The winged one found himself at a loss, having no idea what Ronan was actually after. He barely dared breathe, mulling it over for what felt like ages, though in reality, only a few seconds had passed. With no other options left, the Winged One chose his words carefully and answered. Yes. Though that all happened 200 years ago now. These days, we're just ordinary members of the winged race, living here in this forest. We have no wish to return. As if anticipating Ronan might press for the reason, he offered a brief account of what had happened 200 years ago. Though he looked ordinary enough, and being male carried little standing in the matriarchal Skywing nation. He'd earned his wings, so to speak, working his way over a long span of time into the Queen's royal guard. But back then, the princess's rebellion had struck too quickly. Before word could even get out, the Queen had already fallen. And so, the royal guard, himself included, had been purged along with her. Fortunately, the Queen had foreseen the coup coming, or none of them would have survived at all. Ronan listened quietly. After a moment he asked. That's so. In that case, would you be interested in working for me? And not just you, everyone behind you, your whole people, are welcome to join as well. From what I've gathered talking to you, you're all a people without a home, aren't you? Hiding out here, terrified of the current Queen's purges, claiming you have no interest in going back. No need to keep torturing yourselves over it. It's only a matter of strength, and that, I can grant you, in exchange, you'll pledge your loyalty to me. The words stripped away every last shred of the Winged One's pretense. Every concession made after being wronged usually came down to sheer helplessness. If they'd had the strength to avenge their queen back then, would they really have stayed hidden here for centuries? The answer was clearly no. Ronan simply watched him, and the Winged One felt a crushing weight, like a mountain bearing down, pressing the breath out of him. He gritted his teeth and stammered. My lord, you. He badly wanted to argue back, to insist this wasn't fear, but caution, a patient plan to rise again someday. But the words caught in his throat, refusing to come out. He knew this feeling had a name, cowardice, and it had settled over his entire people like a fog. With a quiet sigh, seeing no other path forward, the Winged One resigned himself, deciding to take the gamble. Nothing could be worse than their current situation, after all. His clenched jaw slowly relaxed, and words of surrender followed. I understand. I will honor your will and relay this to our chieftain. Whatever they decide, I thank you here and now for sparing my life. May I ask your name, my lord? Underscore 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 underscore. I have finished translating this novel. If you want to read ahead, join my Patreon below, and don't forget to use the code from the previous chapter to get a 17% discount. Chapter 70, The Sealed Fairy Realm. 1545 words. Back in the castle, Leon sat sprawled lazily in his chair. Before him stood Fry, the Sky Queen, come to pay a visit. He propped his cheek up with one hand, watching her with a detached, disinterested gaze, his tone offhand. Fry. What brings you to my doorstep? The words carried an unmistakable air of state your business and leave. Fry was used to it by now. He'd been exactly the same 200 years ago. To keep things at least outwardly civil, she curved her lips into a gentle smile and said softly. No need to be so cold, Leon. We're both demon lords, dropping by for a visit shouldn't be so unusual, should it? Leon, however, remained entirely unmoved, his expression still indifferent. Seeing this, Fry let the smile fall away and spoke, more slowly this time. I really do have some business to discuss with you this time. I heard that, 200 years ago, you took in a group of homeless winged folk. I don't suppose you know where they're living now. Hearing Fry finally get to the point, Leon sat up straight at last, the fist that had been propping up his cheek dropping away. He didn't bother remarking on her rudeness in using spatial magic to slip into El Dorado uninvited. She hadn't stormed the castle itself, after all, and simply said, evenly. So that's what brought you here. What is it, after 200 years, has the Sky Queen finally come to bring them home? Or is she here to make sure they die on foreign soil instead? Skip the pleasantries. We're both demon lords, there's no need to put on airs with each other. Just tell me, what are you willing to pay for this? Whatever their past might have been, those winged folk belong to El Dorado now, plain and simple. At this, the corner of Frey's eye twitched faintly. This guy, still exactly this blunt. If I could actually beat him in a fight. Well, forget it, it was precisely because she couldn't that she'd come to pay him a proper visit in the first place. If she'd tried to move covertly instead and gotten caught, being killed for it would have been entirely her own fault. Fry took a deep breath, working to steady her mood, and said, "Gemstones and rare metals, would that work? Those are about the only two things my Skywing nation has in abundance. With your connections, I imagine you could turn them into gold coins easily enough." Leon, demon lord though he was, kept on decent terms with several nations, otherwise, all that gold produced here would have nowhere to go. But decent terms aside, converting the goods into actual currency was still something of a hassle, and would cost him time he'd rather not spend. With that in mind, Leon said, "Not enough." At that, the twitch at the corner of Frey's eye grew more pronounced. Not outright greed, maybe, but this whole kicking someone while they're already down routine of his. Truly, a demon lord to the bone. She took another deep breath, forcing down her irritation. Fine. I'll throw in a piece of information as well, then, something to do with the old sealed fairy realm. If I recall, you were once a human hero, Leon, which means a spirit must have lodged itself within you at some point, and you must have met one of the most ancient demon lords, Ramiris. My source tells me the sealed fairy realm has been closed off. Even you should understand what that means, shouldn't you? Ramiris's reincarnation is about to begin. At this, Leon's gaze lifted slightly, genuine interest sparking at Frey's words. Ramiris was the ruler of the sealed fairy realm. Just as a demon lord had to awaken to become a true demon lord, every hero seeking to awaken had to make a pilgrimage there, to earn the blessing of either the spirit of light, or the spirit of darkness. It might sound strange for a hero to go awaken in a demon lord's own domain, but as already noted, not every demon lord was actually evil. Ramiris had once been the fairy queen, who, thousands of years ago, sacrificed herself, falling into the form of a fairy, to save a world on the brink of collapse. That transformation had come at the cost of a limited lifespan, which meant she could only survive by cycling through endless reincarnations. Thinking it over now, the timing did seem about right. Leon nodded, gathering his thoughts, satisfied. Not bad. I'm quite pleased with this information. Deal's done. Claude, escort her there. Remember, this is a matter between the winged folk themselves. Unless I give the order, you're not to get involved. The moment the words left his mouth, a death knight materialized out of thin air before Leon. Clad in black armor, he dropped into a respectful half-kneel, his voice low and steady. Understood. With that, he rose, turned to Fry with a gesture inviting her to follow, and led her out of the palace. As one of Leon's most trusted subordinates, Claude followed his orders to the letter. Not to get involved carried a second meaning too. Even if he happened to see something, he was to act as though he'd seen nothing at all. And so the two of them, each carrying their own private thoughts, made their way toward the Pamir forest. Meanwhile, Leon belatedly realized something. He rose to his feet, and walked slowly to the window of his palace, gazing out over the grounds beyond, a flicker of unease crossing his eyes. The hero's out there too, along with his companions, nothing's going to go wrong, is it? Ah, forget it. Claude should know how to handle himself with some restraint. Besides, my luck can't possibly be that bad. As long as Fry doesn't go announcing her identity herself, no one will even know she's a demon lord. Recalling how harmless the man looked, Leon decided not to dwell on it any further. They had no real ties to each other anyway. If something did go wrong, it wouldn't be any concern of his. Right now, he had the matter of the sealed fairy realm to attend to. Ramiris, upon reincarnating, would be extraordinarily weak and naive in mind. A single goblin could kill her without much trouble. To make sure nothing went wrong, he needed to prepare well in advance. After all, he'd never forgotten the help that Spirit of Light had once given him, all those years ago. Elsewhere, Ronan had arrived at the winged folks' settlement. Thanks to the pressure radiating off Kyubi, it wasn't long before the tribe's chieftain came out to meet him. The chieftain looked quite elderly, yet the magicules within him were immense, 1 foot already planted on the threshold of becoming a demon lord. Forgive my manners. This old one goes by Feral. May I ask if my esteemed guest wishes to become our master? The winged chieftain offered a bow, then knelt without further ceremony, cutting straight to the point. May I ask where my esteemed guest hails from? And what is your relationship with Leon, the demon lord of this land? Though we've broken away from the Skywing Nation, our conflict with the current queen remains beyond reconciliation. She won't let us be. And should she ever learn we're hiding here, These were all reasonable questions, and Ronan seemed to have anticipated them. He waved a hand lightly, cutting the chieftain off. No need to worry. I already crossed swords with Leon before coming here. He's no match for me. Because of that, I'm free to make use of El Dorado's land however I please. Do you really think the current queen could possibly be stronger than Leon? The chieftain fell silent. That was, plainly, impossible. Leon's reputation was formidable, known far and wide as the White Gold Demon, while Fry had no particularly notable feats to her name. Even killing the previous queen had relied entirely on a surprise attack. The gap between the two of them was obvious enough. Ronan's words swallowed up every other question the chieftain had been about to raise. A moment later, thinking of his people's future, he was about to ask after the terms of their treatment. But right then... No, this is bad, Lord Feral. A sudden, chaotic commotion erupted from outside. The chieftain's brow furrowed, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Unacceptable, he was in the middle of important negotiations with a distinguished guest. Even if it was the hawkfolk attacking, so what? He barked out a sharp reprimand, trying to quiet the noise outside. But right after he caught the words, Fry had appeared in El Dorado, and was flying straight toward them. In an instant, he froze on the spot, disbelief written plainly across his face. Underscore 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 underscore. I have finished translating this novel. If you want to read ahead, join my Patreon below, and don't forget to use the code from the previous chapter to get a 17% discount. Chapter 71, The Sky Queen's Fear. 1,465 words. This. The chieftain blinked, hardly able to believe it. Too much of a coincidence, honestly, anyone unfamiliar with the situation might have mistaken him for a jinx. He looked at Ronan, about to rise to his feet. Ronan raised a hand, cutting him off. No rush. Your queen's here, is she? Lucky timing. Let me have a word with her first. I want to see for myself what kind of attitude she actually holds toward your people. Everything I've heard from you so far has been fairly negative about her, but 200 years is a long time. Memory has a way of bending under the weight of a person's own bias. The chieftain fell silent, his expression turning complicated. But with Ronan's overwhelming strength weighing on him, he had little choice but to go along. Just as well, he was curious himself whether Ronan's words held true. After all, though Ronan was the Wind Fox Demon Lord's master, even Demon Lords came in different tiers of strength. Leon was undoubtedly among the very top. Swish! The chieftain rose and swept the curtain aside without ceremony, letting a sharp gust of wind pour in. The two of them stepped out together, and the scene before them was one of a crowd in a full panic, scattering in every direction. The chaotic mix of shouting and pounding footsteps rose and fell around them, a piercing alarm bell suddenly ringing out. Ronan clicked his tongue lightly, a strange sense of monster invasion washing over him. Not that he couldn't understand it, of course. It was, after all, a bit like enjoying hot pot and singing along to music, only to suddenly get ambushed by a gang of bandits, life hanging in the balance. Anyone would assume the worst of the intruder. The two of them made their way down a narrow passage, arriving at a wooden platform. The place resembled something of a bird's nest, tree houses scattered everywhere, well suited for flight, offering a wide-open view ahead. Ronan activated universal perception to scan the area, and before long spotted a scantily dressed female demi-human flying toward them. Roughly 50 kilometers out. Her wings were a pinkish purple, and she wore something like a red evening gown, covering barely half her chest. The black fabric on her thighs looked like sheer stockings from a distance, but on closer inspection was actually leather. Beside her flew another figure, one Ronan recognized instantly. Leon's own subordinate, Claude. "That your queen?" Ronan turned to the chieftain. The chieftain stood beside him. Blessed with the naturally sharp eyesight of the winged race, he too fixed his gaze on the same direction, his expression turning complicated as he slowly nodded. "Yes. 200 years have changed her appearance somewhat, but I'd still know her anywhere. She was once our second princess, Fry. Now the Sky Queen." "Second princess?" Ronan's brow furrowed, mildly surprised. Who was the first princess, then? He'd assumed the queen had only had one child. Turned out there'd been an elder princess too. Had Fry done away with her as well? The chieftain was about to explain. After all, as her former personal guard, he was privy to a fair amount of the inside story. But right then, some 50 kilometers away, Fry seemed to sense something, her once relaxed expression suddenly tightening. She snapped her wings and vanished from the spot in an instant. Watching this, the chieftain let out a helpless sigh. "Seems she's noticed us already." "That's just as well. With you here beside us, we can finally lay everything out plainly. There's something I've always wanted to know. Why did she kill the previous queen back then? Especially since the first princess had been exiled not long after her birth. There wasn't a single soul left in the entire nation who could have taken her right to the throne." The information had finally come out, and Ronan's thoughts began to wander. Going by that, there seemed to be some hidden story buried in all this too. This world was strange enough as it was. Leon had his own secrets, and now Fry did too. Did every single demon lord have some hidden story like this? Was it too much to hope that, among the 10 great demon lords, at least one of them turned out to be a straightforward villain? Ronan silently found himself at a loss for words, but quickly set the thought aside, deciding to see for himself what kind of person Fry actually was. If she really was a villain, well, there'd be nothing more to discuss. But if she wasn't, bringing a queen under his banner would save him far more time than winning over just a single chieftain. Just now. In the distance, Fry had changed course, recalling the faint sense of being watched she'd felt a moment ago, and couldn't help but shiver. She had no idea where that feeling had come from, but it had been unsettlingly sharp, as if she'd come face to face with something truly terrifying, leaving her deeply unsettled. Was it just my imagination? She couldn't be sure. She asked Claude about it, and he answered that there were no powerful beings in this forest. At least, none as of 100 years ago. 100 years? That answer did nothing to put Frey's mind at ease. She narrowed her eyes, steadied her breathing, and decided caution was the wiser course. Though her own strength ranked somewhere in the middle among the 10 great demon lords, that didn't mean only the ones above her could actually beat her. There were plenty of powerful beings in this world who never showed themselves, a handful of the ancient dragon species, for instance, any one of which could wipe the floor with her without breaking a sweat. As these thoughts churned, Fry drew steadily closer to the winged tribe's settlement. And it was then that she caught, faintly, the presence of a demon lord. The presence made no effort to hide itself, almost like a deliberate show of intimidation, and her brow furrowed at the feel of it. She glanced sideways at Claude, her look practically demanding an explanation for what exactly was going on. Claude. He had nothing to say. When had a demon lord shown up here? How was this news to him? Good thing it was only one, the situation wasn't too dire. He'd just let Fry handle it herself. He gave her a look that made clear this had nothing to do with him, then cleared his throat. Lady Fry, the winged tribe's settlement lies about 500 meters ahead. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave here. I wish you and your kin a pleasant reunion. And should you make it back safely, I do hope you'll deliver those gemstones and medals within the week. At that, Fry nearly laughed out of pure frustration. She felt like she'd been set up by Leon somehow, otherwise, how could it possibly be this convenient, a demon lord showing up right at this exact moment? It was obvious now, he didn't want her wiping out the winged folk, all while still expecting his payment of gems and metal in full. But since she was the one at his mercy here, and this whole matter couldn't be made public, all she could do was swallow her anger for now. Fry gritted her teeth slightly and said, forcing calm into her voice. Understood. With that, choosing not to dwell on it any further, she sped toward the settlement, intent on ending things swiftly, before Leon's scheme could play out any further. But before long, she came to a sudden stop mid-flight. Because a human? The moment she laid eyes on Ronan, and noticed Kyubi beneath him, Fry froze. And in the very next instant, that same primal chill, the one only instinct could summon, surged through her once more. Her heart began to race. It's him. The one who was watching me. Damn it. Leon's man is this strong. One demon lord wasn't enough for him. There's another? Did Clayman and Leon set this up together? Recalling the very reason she'd come here in the first place, fear welled up in Fry, her teeth clenching once more. Instinct screamed at her to flee, but her pride wouldn't let her turn tail so easily. So all she could do was drift downward, caught helplessly between the two. Underscore 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 underscore. I have finished translating this novel. If you want to read ahead, join my Patreon below, and don't forget to use the code from the previous chapter to get a 17% discount. Chapter 72, The Queen's Retreat. 1,410 words. On the other side of the forest, a fierce battle was underway. Boom. A thunderous explosion rocked the trees, smoke billowing through the forest. Ciri's silhouette flickered in and out of the haze, deep in the thick of battle, thoroughly enjoying herself. All around her, twisted, grotesque creatures dropped one after another, like wheat before a scythe. Not long before this, these creatures had come pouring out of a magic circle without warning. Ciri had no idea why they'd appeared, and honestly, she couldn't care less. Judging by their hideous appearance alone, these clearly weren't anything worth handling with kid gloves, and so, a thoroughly one-sided slaughter had begun. Not far off, Flam kept her eyes squeezed tightly shut, not daring to look up. The scene was simply too bloody. Forced to gauge the state of the battle by sound alone, she caught a few scattered, half-formed words drifting through the noise. Something like demon knight, baronet, sacrifice. Demons, huh? Flam murmured to herself, figuring that was probably the case. Only demons, creatures that already sounded terrifying just by name, could possibly look this horrifying. Good thing her master had spotted them in advance, or the local residents here would have faced disaster out of nowhere. While Flam's mind raced through all this, the demons on the battlefield had already been cut down in droves. The battle hunger that had been building up in Ciri for so long finally found its full release. She surveyed the ruined, cratered battlefield before her, listening to the pained wails of the few demons still clinging to life, a satisfied smile curling at her lips. Standing there at the heart of the battlefield, the breeze catching the hem of her clothes, snapping softly in the wind. But just as Ciri was about to bring the fight to a final close. Swish! A figure suddenly materialized above the faintly glowing magic circle. It was a small, delicate girl, looking to be about 15 years old. Right now, her eyes were closed, her body floating quietly in midair, short golden hair drifting gently with the surge of magicules around her. Though her appearance closely resembled a human's, Ciri knew instantly, this was no human at all. The leader, then? Ciri's eyes narrowed slightly, and her mind made its judgment at once. Without hesitation, she dropped back into a battle stance. For her, it didn't matter who they were, as long as they were strong, she'd never turn one down. Just then, the girl slowly opened her eyes. She looked around at her surroundings. Then, every trace of calm drained from her face. First time meeting you, I take it you're the Sky Queen. At the Winged Tribe's settlement, Ronan watched Fry descend slowly from the sky, a faint, easy smile on his face. The corner of Frey's mouth twitched slightly. For some reason, the friendlier this human acted, the deeper her sense of unease grew. This was their first meeting, wasn't it? So why did he seem so oddly interested in her already? Is this man actually one of Leon's or not? Fry landed slowly, folding her wings, and the fact that she hadn't been attacked eased her nerves, if only slightly. The wariness in her eyes, though, hadn't faded one bit. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, fixing Ronan with a cold stare, and asked, "Who are you?" With that, her gaze shifted to the chieftain standing beside Ronan, recognizing him instantly. "So it's you, Uncle Farrell. 200 years, and look how old you've gotten. If I'm not mistaken, you haven't got much time left, have you?" Members of the winged race typically lived 300 to 500 years, though that span could stretch dramatically if one evolved into a demon lord. Which meant Fry, at just over 200 years old herself, had barely reached adulthood by that measure. Farrell was a different story entirely. If he failed to become a demon lord before his life's natural end, he had only a few years left at most. At this, he let out a wistful sigh. "That's right. This old one never imagined I'd live to see the second princess again. Address me as your majesty." Fry cut him off, letting her crossed arms fall to her sides, her voice icy as she added, "The second princess is long gone, Uncle Farrell. You know exactly why I've come here. A queen's authority cannot be allowed to falter. For the sake of the Skywing Nation, none of you, subjects who once served my mother and then defected, can be allowed to live." With that, without waiting for Farrell to argue back, Fry turned her attention to Ronan. "Human, do you intend to insert yourself into our Skywing Nation's internal affairs? I don't know who sent for you, but I'm willing to pay double whatever they offered. Please, stay out of this matter." Fry knew full well she was no match for Ronan, and had no wish to clash with him directly. Fortunately, the Skywing Nation was rich in gemstones and rare metals, and as queen, she had some savings of her own to draw on. As far as she was concerned, buying her way out of a problem always beat fighting, though whether Ronan would actually accept the offer was another matter entirely. Hearing this, Ronan gave a light chuckle. "Double the price? Sky Queen Fry, I don't think you're really in a position to pay it." He looked her straight in the eye, and a flicker of evasion crossed Frey's brown irises. But at the words, "not in a position to pay," she forced her unease down, held his gaze, and asked, "Why not? What exactly did Leon offer you, using my own people to lure me out here? Was this all just to kill me?" To Fry, that seemed like the only possible explanation. At the thought, she instinctively took a small step back, the urge to flee growing stronger by the second. She felt as though she'd been ensnared in some vast, invisible web of conspiracy. In that moment, she'd all but forgotten the harsh words she'd just finished speaking. Step. Just as she was about to turn and flee, Farrell the chieftain stepped forward, extending a thin, withered hand, trying to calm her. "Please, don't worry, Your Highness. Lord Ronan bears you no ill will. He's only here to understand what happened all those years ago. You killed the previous queen, and now you intend to kill us as well, and we, as it happens, are about to become Lord Ronan's own subjects. Naturally, he'd take an interest in this matter." Farrell's words stopped Fry mid-turn, freezing her in place. Her brow furrowed deeply, her gaze locked onto Farrell, shock and confusion flooding through her. "Subjects. Is my luck really this rotten? What exactly is Leon playing at? Why wouldn't he tell me about something this important beforehand? And right in front of the man, too, I went and announced I intended to kill his own people. Even if she hadn't actually followed through yet, trying to buy her way out with money in front of him looked, from any angle, like a direct provocation. Frey's breathing slowed, though her heart raced faster than ever. Seeing this, Ronan shook his head lightly. He turned and said, "Come with me. Let's have a proper talk about what happened 200 years ago, and settle these old grievances once and for all. Don't even think about running. Otherwise, I can't promise what happens to you next." If she died, the Skywing Nation would be left without a leader. Without a demon lord tier power holding it together, the nation would inevitably be carved up by others, marching straight toward ruin. At the thought, Frey's expression darkened. This man. However reluctant she was, the thought of her nation collapsing, her people scattered and adrift, made her grit her teeth, and with no other choice, follow along. As she fell into step behind him, she shot Farrell a venomous glare, a look that seemed to say, "You all really found yourselves quite the master, didn't you? Underscore 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 underscore." I have finished translating this novel. If you want to read ahead, join my Patreon below, and don't forget to use the code from the previous chapter to get a 17% discount. Chapter 73, Fry, I would gladly serve you. 1,438 words. Just as Fry followed Ronan away, the battle between Ciri and the golden-haired girl had reached its boiling point, and was steadily drawing to a close. Not because the golden-haired girl was weak, but because Ciri had infinite life layered on top of everything else. No matter how the golden-haired girl attacked, even casually tearing space itself apart, she couldn't so much as touch a single hair on Ciri's head. "You're a monster, aren't you?" The golden-haired girl gritted her teeth, fists clenched white. She'd never encountered a long-eared race member like this before. She was a primordial demon, standing at the very apex of all demonkind. At her peak, she could level an entire nation without breaking a sweat. And yet, now, what kind of skill do you even have? The golden-haired girl barely managed to block Ciri's magic barrage, shouting the question. Ciri seemed not to hear her at all, utterly lost in the sheer thrill of battle, unable to pull herself away from it. Boom! Her magic power coiled into a spiraling shell, punching straight through the golden-haired girl's multiple barriers. The blast grazed her arm, vaporizing it instantly, only for it to regenerate and heal a moment later. Madwoman! Feeling the pain shooting through her shoulder, sensing the fervor burning in Ciri's eyes, the golden-haired girl cursed silently to herself. Being forced onto the defensive like this, she hadn't experienced anything like it in thousands of years. If any of the other primordials caught wind of this, she'd never live it down. At the thought, she prepared to disengage and retreat. But right then, she spotted Flam not far off, and an idea sparked in her mind. She quickly realized, though, that the idea was useless, because even Flam was someone she simply couldn't harm. Boom! A blast of magic power from Flam sent the golden-haired girl flying, tumbling through the air several times, before she hit the ground, staggering back a few steps before barely regaining her footing. The stones at her feet shattered one after another. The golden-haired girl clenched her fists tight, cursing under her breath. Everything she'd witnessed today had completely upended everything she thought she knew. As one of the primordial yellow, she now found herself unable to even beat a mere child. Had she really fallen this far, or had humans simply changed this much? She genuinely couldn't make sense of it. She took a deep breath. Then, bam! She turned and fled. This world was simply too wrong. Even as much as she loved battle, she had no interest in continuing to fight these monsters. Yes, that Crimson One would surely know something about this. Maybe she'd slipped into the wrong world entirely, landed somewhere resembling the base world, yet fundamentally different. These thoughts flickered through the golden-haired girl's mind, and she had no idea, not even the slightest hint, that Ciri was already building up her ultimate attack right behind her. By the time the golden-haired girl caught on, it was already far too late. A boundless white light flooded her vision in an instant. Even with her perception sped up 10,000 times over, no amount of preparation could have stood against such an overwhelming crush of magic power. Everything went dark before her eyes, and consciousness slipped away. Her shattered body was obliterated almost instantly, what little remained of her sent flying off into the distance under the force of the blast, landing who knew where. Ciri paid no mind to where the golden-haired girl had ended up, or whether she'd even survived. As far as she was concerned, beating her was enough. Perhaps it was that very thought that made her pause, standing quietly where she was. Then, a string of cold, mechanical notification tones rang slowly through her mind. Confirmed. Unique skill, the battle-hungry, acquired successfully. The sudden voice caught Ciri off guard for a moment, and then a bright, delighted smile spread across her face. So I really did awaken it. Turns out holding back her temper hadn't been the way to go after all. Only by letting herself go like this could she awaken a skill of her own. Of course, this kind of display was reserved for strangers only. With her own disciple, she'd never behave this way. Ciri let out a breath, turned, walked over to Flam, took her hand, and headed back out toward the others. As she walked, she thought to herself that once they'd regrouped, she'd share this good news with Ronan. He'd probably offer his congratulations. She glanced back once, the magic circle had already begun fading away. Next step, help Frieren obtain a skill of her own too. She turned her gaze forward again. Time to think of a good way to make that happen. Elsewhere. The primordial yellow slowly stirred awake in the middle of a forest reduced to a flattened crater. She opened her deep blue eyes, feeling a searing pain racking her entire body. No surprise, really, regeneration had drained a massive amount of magicules from her body, enough to leave even her soul affected. She cursed silently, but what actually escaped her lips was a pained groan. Still. Better than dying, at least. The primordial yellow struggled up off the ground, shaking loose the rubble and dust clinging to her. She glanced warily toward the direction Ciri had vanished in, her eyes still shadowed with lingering dread. She made her way to a nearby tree stump, breathing hard, and took a moment to steady herself. Then she decided to hunt down some souls to make up for the damage to her spirit. For demons, whether demi-human or demon person, any soul-carrying, information fragments, the substance that represented strength, could serve as sustenance to replenish their energy. Quality varied, of course, but it hardly mattered. As it happened, the direction she'd been blasted in led straight toward the Hawkfolk settlement, its outline showing up crystal clear through her magic sense. Without a second thought, she set off at once. Pat. Her small, delicate figure left a trail of clear footprints in the soft yellow earth as she walked further and further away. Only once she'd vanished at the end of the path did the timid monsters nearby dare creep closer cautiously. Elsewhere in the winged tribe's settlement, inside a treehouse, Fry sat obediently, cross-legged. All because she'd just noticed the slime lounging on Ronan's lap was, apparently, also a demon lord. The discovery left her utterly stunned, because as far as she knew, something like that simply shouldn't be possible. Everyone knew slimes were weak, weaker even than goblins. If it took 100 billion goblins, once every 10,000 years, to produce a single goblin king, then it would take 100 trillion slimes, once every 100,000 years, to produce even a single slime king. The gap in rarity alone made that plain. And yet, here, a ridiculous thought suddenly surfaced in Frey's mind. Could this human possibly be mass-producing demon lords? If that were true, it would explain everything she was seeing right now. But was that actually possible? Her chest felt heavy, as if she'd stumbled onto some enormous secret. And yet, she didn't dare speak a word of it aloud. The pressure bore down on her like a mountain. Just then, Ronan, watching Frey's eyes, spoke quietly, breaking the heavy silence in the room. There's no one else here now, Fry. Tell me what happened back then. Fry lifted her head, glanced at Ronan, then lowered her gaze again. Catching Farrell in the corner of her eye, she spoke in a low, resigned voice. There's nothing much to say about what happened. I killed my mother. That's all there is to it. I know there's no hiding it from you, so let me ask instead, now that you know, what will you do with me? Fry paused for a moment, then lifted her eyes to meet Ronan's again, and finally voiced her own conclusion. Earlier, I openly provoked you, and you didn't kill me for it. That must mean I still have some value to you, doesn't it? So, I would gladly serve you, like a loyal dog or horse. She bowed her head, her voice sincere, coming straight from the heart. Underscore 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 underscore. I have finished translating this novel. If you want to read ahead, join my Patreon below, and don't forget to use the code from the previous chapter to get a 17% discount. Chapter 74, Resolving the Conflict. 1,533 words. Ronan's dark eyes reflected the scene before him with perfect clarity, Fry, submitting herself so completely. His brow furrowed slightly, and for a moment he had nothing to say. Somehow this all felt like it had moved way too fast. Barely a minute had passed between walking into the room and hearing those words come out of her mouth. She was still a demon lord, after all. He hadn't even had the chance to bring out the stick part of Carrot and Stick yet. He watched her quietly and asked, "Are you sure you don't want to think this over a bit more? This isn't exactly a small decision." Fry lifted her head resolutely, her tone firm, without a trace of hesitation. There's nothing left to think over. My mind's already completely made up. The world of monsters has always run on the logic of the strong preying on the weak. Since you've chosen to shelter the winged race, then naturally, I have no choice but to yield. And besides... Her gaze drifted slowly down to the round little slime nestled in Ronan's arms, a tangle of complicated emotion in her eyes. She let out a soft sigh and continued. If this slime demon lord really is your handiwork, then pledging myself to you is hardly anything to be ashamed of. Noble as my title as Winged Queen might sound, I honestly can't claim to be much of a powerhouse. Frey's talents lay entirely in aerial combat. On the ground, she was hopelessly weak. She fully believed this slime demon lord would surpass her before long, and by then, it would be far too late to offer her loyalty. Ronan nodded, thinking Frey's reasoning made a reasonable enough kind of sense. He'd nearly forgotten, she wasn't human, so there was no reason to expect the usual false modesty or pretense from her. With that, he spoke plainly. You're refreshingly honest. I respect that. But there's something you should know, I'm the hero. A demon lord submitting to a hero. Fry, you understand what that actually means, don't you? No question about it, the human kingdoms would be shaken to their core by this, given how legendary the name of the 10 great demon lords had become. Even the weaker demon lords among them were still forces humanity could barely hope to defeat. Which meant the defeat of even a single demon lord was significant enough to be written into history itself. At this, Fry went strangely silent, as if the words had struck her mute. It took her a long moment to come back to herself, a storm of conflicting emotions churning inside. Right now, only one thought filled her mind. It's over. He's the hero. Why didn't he say so sooner? There had never once been a precedent of a demon lord bowing to a hero in the history of this world, and she was about to become the first, openly, on record. Quite possibly the only one, ever. The other demon lords would never let this slide. She'd be swept straight into the trash heap of history for it. At the thought, Frey's gaze, brimming with resentment, fixed itself squarely on Ronan. The air grew heavy, and she spoke, her voice distant. So, Lord Hero, you certainly won't just sit back and let this happen to me, will you? This humble one truly, sincerely wishes to join your ranks, from the bottom of my heart. Uncle Farrell, did you know he was the hero? Farrell blinked, caught off guard. This was news to him as well, If he'd known, no wonder she'd been so anxious. No wonder the man had claimed to have beaten Leon. If he really was the hero, then everything suddenly made sense. He let out a breath, admitted he hadn't known, then turned to Ronan, trying to read something useful from his expression. In his own understanding, a traditional hero, and the man before him seemed worlds apart. No hero in history had ever taken monsters as his own subordinates. Even if these creatures resembled demi-humans, at their core they still belonged to a fundamentally non-human species. Ronan noticed both their gazes but didn't let it bother him. His expression stayed calm, as if discussing something entirely trivial. No need to look at me like that. I'm just doing what I want to do. It's got nothing to do with any particular allegiance. Since this was a different world, its races weren't nearly as simply black and white as those the goddess had created. Given that, rather than clinging stubbornly to a single fixed stance, it made more sense to occupy a relatively neutral, gray area of his own. As long as he stayed convinced everything he did was righteous, that was enough. Hearing this, the two of them exchanged a glance, and neither pressed the matter further. For a moment, the atmosphere settled into an awkward kind of stalemate. In the end, it was Farrell who broke the somewhat uncomfortable silence. He brought up the matter of the first princess and the late queen, all those years ago. The moment Fry heard the words, first princess, her expression darkened at once. Ugly memories surged up like a tide in her mind, and she let out a cold snort. What's the point of bringing her up now? If it weren't for her disappearing back then, I never would have had to kill Mother. Uncle Farrell, as a male of the winged race, you couldn't possibly understand how brutal the competition for succession really is, could you? With what seemed like a great deal of pent-up frustration weighing on her, and with Ronan present as well, Fry slowly laid out the story of what had happened all those years ago. In short, among the winged race's traditions, every queen, upon inheriting the throne, was required to kill her own sisters, to prove her strength and her right to rule. The victor would inherit everything the loser had once possessed, evolving into a demon lord species in the process. Frey's elder sister, born with certain inherent weaknesses, had lacked the qualities expected of a future queen, and so their mother had sent her away early on. Her sister's departure had cost Fry her only real path to the throne, since she had no other sisters left to inherit from. And with a queen's lifespan stretching on for so long, if Fry didn't want to simply wither away and die of old age one day, her only option had been to try to kill her mother and claim the crown herself. Listening to Frey's account, Ronan didn't offer his opinion right away, only reflecting privately on just how much damage feudal thinking could do to people. That something like ritualized matricide for succession could actually exist, and as an accepted custom, no less. Farrell let out a soft sigh. I see. He could understand why Fry had wanted to silence them all back then. This was information that truly should never have come to light. Better to keep the secret buried than to expose the queen's sins and clear his own name in the process. That way the queen would remain the queen. Farrell's pale eyebrows twitched faintly, a swirl of emotion in his chest, and he continued. None of this is really your fault, though. If this was the custom, passed down since ancient times, then the previous queen must have already anticipated her own death, the moment she sent the first princess away. That's probably exactly why she sent the rest of us away too. A shame, though, if only I'd known sooner. If he'd known earlier, perhaps he could have talked some sense into both the queen and Fry. There had never been any real need for things to end in a fight to the death. One ruling openly from the throne, the other quietly supporting from behind the scenes. History had no shortage of examples like that. As for becoming a demon lord, well, the queen herself already was one. Thousands of years would have been more than enough time to cultivate a second demon lord species from scratch. Farrell laid out his thoughts and Fry, at first, listened with a note of impatience. But as Farrell dug deeper, offering the perspective of an outside observer, the confusion clouding her eyes slowly began to clear. Ronan didn't interject in the exchange between them. As long as the conflict resolved itself, that was all that mattered. That had been his intention in bringing the two of them together in the first place. By the time Farrell finished laying out his perspective, Fry had come to fully understand her own mistake, and just how foolish this cycle of kin killing kin truly was. Still, she felt no regret over what she'd done, only a quiet resolve that this cycle would end with her. Underscore 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 underscore. I have finished translating this novel. If you want to read ahead, join my Patreon below, and don't forget to use the code from the previous chapter to get a 17% discount. Chapter 75, Chapter 75, Encountering the Primordial Yellow. 1,360 words. The Hawkfolk Settlement. Ah! You monster, someone help us. A desperate scream tore through the sky, laced with terror and death. The wooden platform, once clean and orderly, had become a scene straight out of hell. Crimson blood flowed freely, seeping down through the gaps between the wooden planks, while scattered bones lay strewn about, gleaming with a cold, pale light. Tap, tap, tap. The primordial yellow walked through it all with perfect indifference, utterly unbothered by the sticky pools of blood beneath her feet. She strolled slowly up to the last remaining hawkman, watching his eyes bulge with terror, his face twisted in fear, and felt nothing but contempt rise up inside her. Garbage. She spat the word out with disdain, no longer bothering to waste words on this dying wretch. Closing her hand loosely, she absorbed his soul, then rubbed her head, feeling the damage to her own spirit had largely healed over. She let out a breath, reflecting that this world really was fine after all, the only problems had been that girl and the child. Good thing she'd never have to see them again. Otherwise, she genuinely couldn't bear to imagine how it might have ended for her. Damn long-eared race. Grumbling to herself, the primordial yellow turned and left the Hawkfolk settlement. Thanks to the sacrifice of those demons, she'd finally managed a brief awakening after slumbering beneath this land for thousands of years. The window she had was only 3 days or so, but it still beat the barren wasteland of the demon realm by a wide margin. Whoosh! A refreshing breeze swept past, instantly scattering the stench of blood in the air. She looked out at the lush green trees around her, and her mood lifted noticeably. Basking in the sunlight, the primordial yellow flexed her fists, deciding to go find someone else to fight. Now that she knew this world wasn't actually broken, there was no point wasting time tracking down Guy. She rather disliked that one anyway. Demons were natural rivals to one another, and besides, he actually had a name. Elsewhere. With the old grievances finally laid to rest, Farrell left the treehouse, and made his way slowly out onto the platform. He was ready to gather the whole tribe, and announce the momentous decision to submit to Ronan's banner. But just then, a young winged warrior came flying in from the distance in a panic. His expression was frantic as he reported urgent news. The Hawkfolk had been wiped out entirely, not even the women and children spared. Hearing this, Farrell froze for a moment, disbelief spreading across his face, then his eyes went wide. What? He thought he must have misheard. Wiped out entirely. The Hawkfolk might not be a particularly powerful race, but they still fell somewhere between mid-tier and high-tier Magian status. Otherwise, there was no way they could have gone toe-to-toe with the winged race in an inconclusive war stretching decades, if not longer. Are you absolutely certain you didn't see wrong? This isn't a small matter. Farrell fixed the warrior with a hard, worried stare. Whoever could wipe out the Hawkfolk could just as easily wipe out the winged race too. The thought of a killer like that roaming somewhere in this forest left him deeply unsettled. Still, remembering Ronan's presence, Farrell finally let out a breath of relief and continued. Zell, tell me everything you saw, in full detail. What exactly happened? Did you get a good look at the culprit? Zell quickly relayed what he knew, saying the culprit was a girl with golden hair. It was only thanks to his enhanced sight, X-ray vision, and presence concealment skills that he'd been able to watch from over 100 kilometers away without being detected. Beside them, golden hair. At that detail, an image immediately surfaced in Ronan's mind. His brow furrowed slightly, a thought forming in the back of his mind, no way. Knowing Ciri's temperament, if the hawkfolk had provoked her somehow, it was entirely possible she'd march straight over to teach them a lesson. But an outright massacre, sparing not even the women and children, that didn't quite fit her style, either. And with Flam right beside her the whole time, that alone would have kept her somewhat in check, it probably wasn't her. At the thought, the tension in Ronan's brow eased, replaced by a flicker of genuine curiosity. If this powerful stranger belonged to some race other than human, that would only make things more interesting. He'd been short on capable hands lately, after all. He listened quietly to Zell's account, and once the warrior finished, he was ready to go track the culprit down himself. But right then, Fry suddenly raised her hand, volunteering herself. "Let me go." She swept her gaze over everyone gathered, her eyes finally settling on Ronan, and explained. "To wipe out an entire race that easily, even if her strength hasn't quite reached Demon Lord tier, she can't be far off. We don't know where she came from, but letting her keep wandering loose through this forest hardly seems wise. I'm willing to go deal with her myself." Fry had another motive behind this offer, too. She wanted to find out for herself whether this had anything to do with Clayman. If the intelligence she'd stolen from Clayman hadn't been faulty, she never would have ended up as someone else's subordinate in the first place. Even if this turned out to be pure coincidence, she couldn't afford to let it slide easily. After all, this world had no shortage of things that looked like coincidence on the surface, but were actually carefully orchestrated schemes underneath. Ronan considered this for a moment, then nodded. Frey's proposal had interrupted whatever plan he'd originally had in mind. Seeing her step up so readily, he found it hard to refuse, and went along with it. "Since you're this confident, go ahead. I'll send the slime along with you. I've no idea who this woman really is, but I can promise you this much, she's no match for either of you." With that, Fry turned and left the Winged Tribe's settlement, ready to track down the golden-haired girl based on what the others had told her. The slime, following along, leapt up and settled snugly against her chest, swaying gently. Whoosh! Fry spread her wings, cradling the slime, and took off into the sky. A strong gust of wind swept past as Ronan watched her figure recede into the distance, mulling things over for a moment. A little later, once he'd finished arranging for the Winged Tribe to head toward the base, Ronan decided to follow along and see for himself. Though Fry had pledged her loyalty, there was always the chance something unexpected could still happen. Besides, if that golden-haired girl really did turn out to be Ciri, then even with the slime along for backup, Fry would still get thoroughly wrecked. And if she ended up dying in the process, finding another winged queen wouldn't come easy at all. With that, Ronan slipped back into the forest, and before long, spotted the golden-haired girl moving about without a trace of caution. Watching from a distance, he eventually arrived at two conclusions. Good news, not Ciri. Bad news, she was a demon, squarely in the camp of pure, unrepentant evil, the kind no sympathetic backstory could ever redeem. If he wanted to bring her into the fold, he was in for no shortage of trouble. Still, if Ronan remembered right, guiding people toward the light was technically part of a hero's job description too. Trouble or not, he figured, he wasn't exactly a real hero anyway. If talking it out didn't work, there was always the option of simply beating her down later. With that thought, Ronan began his descent. Underscore 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 underscore. I have finished translating this novel. If you want to read ahead, join my Patreon below, and don't forget to use the code from the previous chapter to get a 17% discount. Chapter 76, Chapter 76, Frieren's Unique Skill. 1,544 words. Ugh, naming things is such a pain. At the same moment Ronan crossed paths with the primordial yellow, on the other side of the forest, Frieren found herself with a splitting headache of her own. Since goblins were only useful once evolved, she stared out at the dense crowd before her, well over 100 goblins strong. At the thought of having to come up with a distinct name for every single one of them, Frieren suddenly felt utterly overwhelmed. But it was a task assigned to her, and she couldn't simply ignore it. So, clutching a dictionary, she glanced at the Death Knight assigned to keep order nearby, then at Shizue Izawa, who couldn't read a single character, and finally decided just to assign names at random. There wasn't much else to be done, really. As a village girl from something like an ancient Greek era of her own upbringing, Frieren had barely had any exposure to formal learning. Even after picking up magic later on, she'd only ever learned a handful of simple characters. Visualization had always been enough for spellcasting. Which meant her literacy level was probably on par with a grade schooler's, at best. Letting out a small sigh, she slowly opened the dictionary, and a dense wall of text swam into view. She couldn't read it. But she desperately wanted to. The concrete form her wish took shape almost instantly, drawing on the magicules within her. A faint white light shimmered over her skin, and as usual, the voice of the world rang out in her mind. Except. This time, something felt different. Confirmed. Unique skill the seeker acquired successfully. Frieren, who'd expected nothing more than some kind of literacy skill, froze for a second at this. She thought it over carefully, a unique skill. Really? Brow furrowed, doubt swirling in her mind, did that even make sense? She had no idea, but she did know one thing: in this world, acquiring a unique skill was extraordinarily rare. Even Shizue Izawa, badly burned and hovering at death's door, hadn't awakened one. Still thinking back to Flam, and to Ronan, Frieren gradually relaxed. It probably had something to do with stats. Leon had mentioned something about being bathed in magicules after all. Expression flat, mind buzzing with thoughts, Frieren began carefully working through the seeker's abilities. But right then, a flood of information suddenly unfolded before her eyes. The dictionary in her hands broke down into the raw materials used to print it, things like flame-mane tree bark and comma ink. The text these materials had once become printed itself with perfect clarity into her mind, even the full manufacturing process laid bare. The instant she saw all this, Frieren froze all over again. She rubbed her eyes, half convinced she was hallucinating, but the information hovering before her, refusing to fade, told her this was all completely real. Only then did it finally dawn on Frieren just how many abilities the Seeker actually held. The Seeker, accelerated thought traced to the source, parallel computation, chantless casting, all creation. Judging by the names alone, this unique skill was clearly tied to knowledge. Accelerated thought needed no explanation, perception sped up 1,000-fold. Traced to the source, paired with all creation, could restore anything she'd ever come into contact with back to its original, truest form, regardless of its origin. Parallel computation let her carry out deductions during that restoration process, like a dual-core processor compared to a single-core one, dramatically boosting her processing power. Chantless casting was straightforward enough. Magic in this world normally required speaking an incantation aloud. This ability let her skip that step entirely. Every single one of these was, right now, of enormous use to Frieren. She let out a small breath, a flicker of light in her eyes, a quiet happiness settling in. The Seeker's arrival felt like nothing short of rain after a long drought. Beside her, Shizue Izawa had no idea about the whole chain of changes that had just unfolded within Frieren. Watching Frieren look lost in thought, faintly excited, she asked, half on instinct. "Big Sister Frieren, have you decided on their names yet? Divine Lord will be back soon. If we're not done by evening, I'm worried." Frieren turned her head, glanced at her, and answered, her voice calm as still water, though carrying a note of reassurance. "It's fine. Even if the naming isn't finished, he won't blame you for it. You're Shizue Izawa, right? I have a task for you, go check whether our house has been built yet. I'll handle the names on my own." The names weren't the important part, the house was. Frieren had no desire to spend any more time than necessary in that gloomy castle. Because of this, that very morning, Ronan had handed Leon a set of building plans, asking him to have his subordinates constructed exactly as specified. It was, in his mind, the perfect home. It included a swimming pool, a game room, a sauna, and a hot spring, things none of them had ever experienced before. As for where the hot spring's water would actually come from, well, that wasn't Ronan's problem to solve. Leon ruled over an entire continent. If he couldn't manage to produce a hot spring, he hardly deserved the title of Demon Lord. Shizue Izawa listened to Frieren's words, hesitated a moment, then nodded softly. Okay. I'll leave it to you then, big sister Frieren. Though part of her wanted to stay and help with the naming, Shizue Izawa knew she lacked the knowledge to be of much use, however long she stuck around. Better to spend her time overseeing their future home, instead of wasting it here. With that, she turned and headed off toward the residential area. Watching her go, Frieren let out a breath, her focus settling back onto the dictionary, and a flood of naming inspiration suddenly filled her once empty mind. Drawing on her first impressions of each goblin, she got straight to work. Glorp. A soft, squishy slime dropped from the sky, engulfing the primordial yellow completely. The slime's entire body was a viscous, gel-like mass, flowing and clinging like liquid glue, able to shift shape, spread, and stretch endlessly, and no matter how hard the primordial yellow struggled, she couldn't tear free. Caught off guard by the sudden ambush, the primordial yellow froze for a moment. Then, bam! A furious punch sent the blue liquid exploding outward in every direction, only for it to reform an instant later, clinging to her just as tightly as before. The primordial yellow cursed under her breath, utterly baffled that a forest like this could possibly hide such a stubbornly persistent slime. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Fry beat her wings, and a dense volley of feathers shot out like a rain of arrows. The primordial yellow had first assumed her earlier massacre had simply been marred by bad luck, failing to leave no survivors behind. But the moment she caught sight of the men slowly descending from the sky, the primordial yellow finally understood, she'd been set up, ambushed. A nameless fury surged up inside her. Bastard! She clenched her fists, her face twisted with pure rage. Even a human dared provoke her now. Did they really think she had no temper of her own? The primordial yellow refused to believe every human she met would turn out like Flam and Ciri. She unleashed a burst of gravity magic, but thanks to his flight, it had no effect whatsoever. And so, bam! The primordial yellow launched herself high into the air, hurtling straight at Ronan, using the momentum in an attempt to tear free from the slime's grip. As for Fry, a lowly nobody who hadn't even awakened as a demon lord yet, she barely registered as a concern at all. Seeing the woman charge straight at him, Ronan felt no surprise. Whenever a third party showed up mid-battle, anyone would take the chance to test the waters. Composed as he was, though, Ronan had no intention of letting her little plan succeed. Conveniently enough, the Justice had just evolved into Michael, Lord of Justice. He'd been looking for a chance to test out its authority. And now, faced with a demon who clearly wasn't open to reasoning, he parted his lips slightly, his eyes reflecting the primordial yellow's furious, oncoming fist, and mental domination activated, working like a spell of true words. Kneel. The instant the words left his mouth. Bam! The primordial yellow crashed to the ground with tremendous force, her body slamming down hard, the impact sending up a dull boom, and a cloud of dust billowing up around her. Once the dust finally settled, the primordial yellow looked at the wreckage scattered around her, then down at the cracked earth beneath her own body, momentarily unable to tell whether this was reality or some kind of illusion. I actually... Underscore 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 underscore. I have finished translating this novel. If you want to read ahead, join my Patreon below, and don't forget to use the code from the previous chapter to get a 17% discount. Chapter 77, Chapter 77, The Primordial Yellow's Submission, Everyone's Growth. 2,734 words. Crack. The grinding sound of clenched teeth cut clearly through the quiet air, and the primordial yellow's eyes went wide. She simply couldn't believe it, that a single sentence had brought her to her knees like this. She strained with everything she had to rise, but her muscles wouldn't respond at all, as if control over her own body had been stripped away entirely. A mental attack. That was the only possibility. After the sacrifice ritual, she now existed as a semi-spiritual life form. Only an attack targeting the mind could produce an effect like this. By then, Ronan had already descended from the sky. He walked up to the primordial yellow and looked down at her from above. Was it you causing trouble in this forest? What's your name? Ronan didn't recognize her, but going by sheer power alone, she was undoubtedly some named demon of note. As he spoke, he activated Fengling Yuing, curious to check her stats. He hadn't expected much, but her numbers, averaged out, landed almost exactly on par with Leon's. Ronan's eyes narrowed. El Dorado, it seemed, was more dangerous than he'd assumed, some random demon wandering loose out here, and she already had the strength of an awakened demon lord. Good thing he'd chosen a relatively safe area to settle down in. Otherwise, dealing with creatures like this on a daily basis would sour even the nicest environment. While Ronan was still taking her measure, the primordial yellow had fully come back to her senses. Noticing the look in his eyes as he studied her, indignant and resentful, she shouted. How rude. You bastard. I am a demon duke. A mere human, treating me this way. Once I revive, I'll wipe every last one of you out. Big talk, but Ronan barely registered it, not even bothering to blink. Someone who couldn't even handle a single sentence from him, hardly in a position to threaten further slaughter. Still, the words Demon Duke piqued his interest a little. In theory, only the very first demons could ever reach that rank, since it required an immense amount of time to accumulate. Above Duke came Archduke, and above that, Demon King, a title that, like the others, required a bestowed name to actually hold. Leon's friend was currently at that exact level. His name was Guy Crimson, the Primordial Red. And this little brat in front of him. You're the Primordial Yellow. A spark went off in Ronan's mind. He vaguely recalled hearing rumors that the Primordial Yellow was said to be slumbering somewhere beneath this land. It was, apparently, part of the reason Leon had chosen to stay here in the first place. The moment he left, war would break out, blood would soak the earth, and the Primordial Yellow would awaken, plunging the human world into a massive crisis. Hearing this, the Primordial Yellow finally found something to feel proud of. She crossed her arms, striking a haughty pose, though kneeling on the ground as she was, the whole effect came off rather comical. She didn't seem to care at all, speaking as if declaring some kind of moral victory. That's right. I am the legendary, supreme, unbeatable Primordial Yellow, undefeated for 5,000 years. Human, now that you know all this, hurry up and let me go. We demons hold grudges for a very, very long time, you know. Her tone had shifted yet again. Ronan sensed a good deal of her earlier anger had already faded, probably just a passing fit of temper. He'd only ever seen this kind of personality in children before. Slumbering for that long clearly hadn't been a lie. Otherwise, there'd be no reason for someone to remain this naive after 5,000 years. Ronan looked down at her, his expression still calm. Is that so? Then go ahead, show me. Let's see if you're really as impressive as you claim. I heard you command nuclear strike magic, powerful enough to level an entire continent in one blow. Why not use it? At those words, the air fell into an eerie stillness. The Primordial Yellow had nothing to say. What kind of question is that? If she could actually use nuclear strike magic, she'd have done it already. Who could have known, before this whole thing started, that this human would turn out to be this dangerous, wielding some power capable of subduing a primordial demon? Some kind of ultimate skill. Thoughts racing through her mind, the Primordial Yellow let out a cold snort, and her nature wouldn't let her lie even for a moment. Didn't expect you'd even know about that. You're right, I do command nuclear strike magic. But as you can plainly see, I can't move a muscle, and my strength hasn't recovered to its peak. I don't know how you did it, but there's no denying it, you've won, human. Kill me, torture me, do as you please. But before that, I'd like to know your name. Even if I, the primordial yellow, must die, I refuse to die at the hands of some nobody. This was her line in the sand as a demon, her pride. Death for a demon wasn't the end, she'd revive eventually. But with her core destroyed, she'd be bound to serve whoever defeated her, unconditionally. Which meant the name of the one who beat her mattered a great deal. Hearing this, Ronan found himself a little surprised by the primordial yellow's candor and straightforwardness. He'd never expected an opponent to answer him quite like this. Impressed, he told her his thoughts, plain and simple. Hearing this, the primordial yellow's brow furrowed, a flicker of hesitation crossing her eyes. This human wants to bring me under his banner. Unbelievable. Never mind how a human intended to bestow a name on her, or grant her a physical body. The simple idea of a human associating with a demon was, in most people's eyes, already unthinkable. Most people were fools, though. She'd never actually harbored malice toward humans, even the moments that looked like hostility had really just been irritation, nothing more. But those very same people had mistaken her irritation for volatility, and sealed her beneath this continent for it. If not for that, would her mood have soured this badly over time? She lifted her gaze and asked, "Are you serious about this? Can I ask why you'd want to bring me into your service? Knowing full well I'm one of the 7 primordial demons. To you humans, isn't demon basically synonymous with evil?" True enough, but Ronan wasn't from this world's human population, after all. Without any preconceived bias, there was no reason for him to act rigidly out of principle. Besides, bringing a demon under his wing meant one less enemy for humanity. His own strength grew, and it benefited both sides in the process. Once Ronan had laid out part of the truth, the primordial yellow, equally struck by his candor, gave a slow nod of understanding. "I see. A human from another world. Well, that changes things. Either way, she'd already lost. By the rules, submission was the proper course now, except..." A little later, Ronan learned from the primordial yellow what conditions a demon needed to meet in order to maintain a lasting presence in the material plane. She'd need the sacrifice of at least 5,000 human souls to serve as the foundation for gaining a physical body. Ronan's brow furrowed instinctively. For a moment, he considered just giving up on the whole idea, no need to lower his own standards just to gain one more subordinate. But the primordial yellow seemed to see straight through his hesitation. She broke the silence at just the right moment. "Actually, you don't need to act on this personally. Any battlefield would do just fine. For us demons, it hardly matters who did the killing. I imagine you, my lord, wouldn't much care about the lives and deaths of people who have nothing to do with you, would you?" The primordial yellow understood human nature well enough, and Ronan's hesitation didn't surprise her in the slightest. Demons didn't feed on humans as sustenance, after all. The reason they craved souls was simply to savor the negative emotions within them, hatred, resentment, and the like. And once she revived and had a physical body of her own, this particular need would vanish entirely. There was no reason to test Ronan's limits over something so temporary. Hearing this, Ronan narrowed his eyes slightly, deep in thought. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "A battlefield, huh? If that's all it takes, then it's not a problem. 3 days should be more than enough time." The human world was vast, and war was nearly constant somewhere or other. When the time came, he could simply direct the soul harvesting toward whoever had started the fighting in the first place. With that settled, Ronan gathered his thoughts and turned to head back, adding a warning to the primordial yellow as he went. "Keep your presence low from now on. Don't make a scene. I'll handle the matter of gathering souls as quickly as possible and put an end to it." He paused, then asked, "Do you have a name?" The primordial yellow trailed behind him, glancing down at her own insubstantial form, a helpless look crossing her face. "No. I know you want to give me a name, my lord, but now isn't a good time for it. Without a physical body, even if I received a massive amount of magicules all at once, it would simply fade away over time. Also, I'm a primordial demon, the amount of magicules required to bestow a name on me would be astronomical. Judging by that pet you brought along, it'd take at least 10 of him. If you're not confident you can manage it, it might be best to hold off on the naming for now. Your strength speaks for itself, there's no need to burn through something so precious just for my sake. The pet the primordial yellow referred to was Kyubi. Hearing her words, Ronan gave her a second, closer look. Well, no wonder, a primordial demon, through and through. After all, Kyubi was already a demon lord species now. If evolution beyond that hadn't required human souls specifically, he'd likely already have ascended to a true demon lord by this point. Ronan mulled it over for a moment, but didn't answer directly. He had infinite magicules at his disposal anyway. When the time actually came to bestow the name, he'd know soon enough whether it was feasible. He waved a hand, calling the slime back from where it had left the primordial yellow, and shouted up at Fry, still frozen in stunned silence in the sky. Let's head back. And remember, everything that happened here today stays completely confidential. I don't want to hear a single word about me having taken in a primordial demon. At this, Fry snapped back to her senses at once, a bitter smile spreading across her face. She'd assumed the enemy was just some unremarkable, if fairly strong, opponent, never expecting a primordial demon of all things. She took a deep breath and nodded solemnly. Understood. Your command will be obeyed. The primordial yellow's reputation alone was terrifying enough, and Ronan, who'd managed to defeat her, was even more so. Under the circumstances, only sheer madness would drive her to leak this secret on her own. Still, she understood well enough, keeping quiet for now didn't mean it could stay hidden forever. Even if she said nothing herself, others would eventually piece it together, sooner or later, once the primordial yellow's reappearance in the world became known. Ronan had already thought this through too, though it didn't particularly concern him. By the time that happened, he'd have secured a solid foothold of his own. Right now was different. He had no interest in drawing constant harassment from the human empire this early into his plans. With that, the group made their way back the way they'd come. By the time everything was properly arranged, it was already afternoon. On the way back, Ronan continued gathering allies, bringing the rabbit folk and the bee folk living near the winged tribe into the fold. The rabbit folk, gentle-natured by disposition, didn't hesitate for a moment when Ronan extended his offer, quickly pledging themselves. Ronan was quite satisfied with their attitude. The bee folk proved somewhat different, but even so, they too had to bow to the same law of the strong preying on the weak that governed this world. With the bee queen's submission secured, the first day's efforts finally drew to a close. By the time they returned to the rendezvous point, Ciri and Flam were already there, waiting. Beside them stood a cluster of battered, bruised werewolves, clearly having gone a few rounds with Ciri already. Ronan gave a nod of acknowledgement. Ciri stepped forward, sweeping her gaze over him, and a string of questions came tumbling out at once. So this is what you managed to gather? A bunch of rabbits, bees, and birds. Where are Frieren and Shizue Izawa? And where did this fox under you come from? Why is it so massive? And her sharp gaze locked onto the primordial yellow beside Ronan, a flash of hostility crossing her eyes. Why is this woman here? She's not dead. At this, the primordial yellow let out an irritated tch, not bothering to argue with Ciri. Ah, one of the master's companions. No wonder she's this strong, she thought to herself. Sensing the tension building in the air, Ronan gave a rough recap of everything that had happened that morning. Once Ciri learned that Frieren and Shizue Izawa had already gone back, and that this demon had already sworn herself to Ronan, she crossed her arms and gave a nod of understanding. She studied the primordial yellow for a moment longer, then turned to the werewolves beside her, pointing at them as she said. These ones are solid hands for heavy labor. With them around, construction should wrap up pretty quickly. Since Shizue Izawa and Frieren have already headed back, we might as well move on too. The group left the rendezvous point. Along the way, Ciri told Ronan about her clash with the primordial yellow, and how she'd awakened a unique skill of her own in the process. Ronan learned the 4 abilities that came with the battle-hungry, considering them for a moment. Accelerated thought, fervent mind, mana sense, and pain nullification. That fits your fighting style pretty well, honestly. Fervent mind came with a degree of built-in immunity to mental attacks, which meant Ciri now had a measure of mental resistance to match. As he mulled this over, Ronan tried adjusting the rank of this unique skill. Before long, drawing on a massive expenditure of magicules, the battle-hungry ascended into Athena, goddess of war. The sudden appearance of a Greek deity's name caught Ronan a little off guard, though the thought settled quickly enough. Ultimate skills, it seemed, weren't limited to just the names of the 7 deadly sins or 7 virtues, angels and demons alike. Looking across the full sweep of history, Japanese, Egyptian, even Cthulhu mythos names had all found their way in. A Greek pantheon presence, then, was hardly surprising. As for Flam, Ronan followed the same approach, upgrading the merciful into Serial, Lord of Hope. He wasn't particularly worried that casually modifying skills like this might draw the creator god's attention. Because according to what the primordial yellow had told him, the creator god of this world was already dead, which meant there was no reason to be cautious about how liberally he exercised his authority to modify things. The stronger they all became, the more they could help him, and the more time it would save him in the long run. Underscore 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 underscore. I have finished translating this novel. If you want to read ahead, join my Patreon below, and don't forget to use the code from the previous chapter to get a 17% discount. Chapter 78, Chapter 78, The Eastern Empire, the Emperor's Move, Malice Toward the Hero. 1427 words. Divine Lord, you're finally back. Our house is already half built, should we stay in that demon lord's castle again tonight? The moment Ronan returned, Shizue Izawa hurried over to him, her face full of anticipation. Hearing the title, Ciri, long since used to it by now, felt nothing particular about it. Given everything Ronan had pulled off so far, Divine Lord wasn't exactly a stretch. The primordial yellow, however, had no idea about any of the backstory. She glanced at Ronan, both surprised and a little amused, finding the title decidedly odd. Just a child's playful nonsense. She mulled it over briefly and filed the thought away. Now that she'd sworn herself to Ronan, everything about her master was worth understanding thoroughly. Ronan gave a light nod, glancing over at the house not far off, its foundation and framework already in place, and said offhandedly, "Let's stay one more night, then. With all these races helping out, it should be finished by tomorrow." At that, he remembered something and turned to Fry. "How long can you stay here? You're the queen of the Skywing Nation, right? Before you leave, I'd like you to set up some kind of order here. Human rules might not translate well to demi-humans." Thanks to the bestowal of names, even the goblins had grown noticeably more human-like, calling them demi-humans now wasn't a stretch at all. Understood. Fry accepted the order and turned to leave, the rest of the winged folk following behind her, ready to be settled in. Once Frey's figure had vanished from view, Ronan let out a breath, and turned to see Frieren approaching from a distance, having finished both the naming and assigning the goblins their various tasks. For some reason, the moment he laid eyes on Frieren, Ronan sensed she'd changed quite a bit. Almost as if she'd gotten sharper somehow. Just my imagination. Ronan's brow furrowed. Then he learned that Frieren, too, had awakened a unique skill. Without question, good news, though it had come remarkably fast. In the span of a single day, everyone except Shizue Izawa had gained something of their own. Only makes sense, really, a perk courtesy of the will of the world, granted to transmigrators. Combined with his own cheats, there was practically no stopping any of them at this rate. Ronan had wanted to upgrade Frieren's newly gained the Seeker, but she flatly refused. "No, not yet. This skill is too complicated, I still haven't fully figured it out. Let's wait a while longer. Besides..." Her gaze drifted, almost unintentionally, toward Shizue Izawa. Ronan caught the look and understood everything at once. Ah, I see, worried it might throw off the girl's sense of balance. It seemed the skills awakening really had made Frieren noticeably sharper. The old Frieren wouldn't have thought twice about something like this. She'd grown a bit more considerate, more attuned to others these days. Ronan nodded, understood. Take your time getting used to it, then. Analytical skills are far more valuable to us than combat ones, honestly. The seeker showing up more or less fills in a weak spot our team was missing. A single tree doesn't make a forest, no matter how strong they were individually, without intelligence, they'd still be at a disadvantage, since there would surely be beings out there stronger than themselves. Ronan wasn't naive enough to think Fengling Yuing was necessarily the strongest authority around. Frieren turned and left, ready to expose herself to more of the world, gathering more information, wanting to understand everything there was to know. Ronan, meanwhile, led the rabbit folk and bee folk onward. By the time he'd gotten them all settled in, dusk had already fallen. Right then, one of Leon's subordinates came to deliver a report. The hot spring, they said, had been located and retrieved, and had already been magically transported into the still unfinished courtyard. Hearing this, Ronan rubbed his shoulder, a flicker of interest sparking inside him. A full day of running around, even with infinite stamina active, his mind, at least, had grown a little worn. He'd never gotten to soak in a hot spring back in his old life, there simply hadn't been time. But now. Take me there. Ronan replied, and at the same time, made a mental note to gather up the rest of the group. He'd only ever seen Japan's mixed bathing culture on TV or in manga. He had to admit, of all the things he found distasteful, this wasn't one of them. At the very moment Ronan settled in to enjoy the hot spring, far off in the Eastern Empire, the Emperor Rudra, several thousand years old this year, slowly stirred from his slumber. His movements were painfully slow, as if he'd slept for so long even his body had gone stiff. He opened his deep, dark eyes, draped in a yellow robe, seated upon a throne carved with the image of a dragon. Faint light streamed down from above, illuminating cheeks that still looked youthful, almost boyish, his golden hair shimmering brilliantly in the dim glow. And yet, no one who laid eyes on him would ever dare underestimate him. Because he was the emperor, the strongest being in this nation. He had once been a friend to the creator god herself, the Star King Dragon Veldanava, and was, in fact, her own disciple. Has my authority been divided up? Rudra's brow furrowed faintly, sensing the loss of something within himself, a flicker of emotion crossing eyes as still as an ancient, undisturbed well. While he'd slept, he hadn't known what exactly he'd lost. Now, fully awake, he finally realized, it was a Michael, Lord of Justice. That authority had once been lent to him by the Star King Dragon herself. Meant for the day the world fell into chaos, so he could summon a legion of angels to sweep away all evil and forge an ideal nation where everyone stood equal. Though thousands of years had passed without that opportunity ever arriving, and some considered his vision far too extreme, after all, a society of absolute equality had never truly existed. But even so. Humph. Rudra let out a cold snort, and the weariness on his face vanished instantly, replaced by a commanding air of authority. Without hesitation, he spoke coldly into the darkness. Velgrind, look into this for me. My angelic legion has vanished into thin air. This must be connected to a hero, or someone from another world. Only they would carry a sense of justice similar to my own. Velgrind was the Star King Dragon's younger sister, wielder of the authority over Scorching Heat, one of the world's few ancient dragon species, known as the Scorching Dragon. Yet, in stark contrast to her fiery title, her hair fell in a shade of icy indigo blue. At Rudra's words, she stepped gracefully out of the darkness. Tap, tap. Her footsteps rang out crisp and rhythmic. Emerging into the light, she could be seen holding a folding fan, dressed in a strikingly familiar qipao, her hair done up in two buns, resembling, more than anything, a stylized image of China-chan. Velgrind fixed her gaze on Rudra, and for a moment, a warm glimmer of affection crossed her eyes, love, plain and simple, meant for him. Then that softness sharpened once more, her voice turning cold and clear. Understood. That some outsider dared steal your power is truly unforgivable. She didn't bother asking how Rudra had already narrowed his suspects down to a hero, or an outsider from another world. Thousands of years had given anyone plenty of time to fully study the conditions required to awaken an ultimate skill. And even if Michael, Lord of Justice, hadn't originally belonged to Rudra, what did it matter? She loved him. What belonged to her brother was hers, and what was hers belonged to him in turn. She would never allow Michael, Lord of Justice, to fall into a stranger's hands. With that, she gave a slight bow and took her leave. Soon after, she began mobilizing the Empire's full strength, ready to search the entire world for whoever now held Michael, Lord of Justice. And once they found him, no mercy would be shown. Underscore 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 underscore. I have finished translating this novel. If you want to read ahead, join my Patreon below, and don't forget to use the code from the previous chapter to get a 17% discount. Chapter 79, Hot Spring, Daily Life. 1,369 words. Warm steam rose gently from the hot spring, drifting through the air like a fine, sheer veil. Ronan leaned comfortably against the warm stone wall, taking a slow sip of a drink unique to El Dorado, thinking to himself that this was what life was supposed to look like. Though he had no idea where this wooden partition dividing the two sides of the spring had come from, at least it sat right across from him, close enough to touch. Thinking it over, aside from Shizue Izawa, everyone else here had lived in eras wildly different from Japan's. Suddenly expecting them to adapt to customs from centuries removed from their own, anyone would find that a hard adjustment. Still some work to do, then. Ronan narrowed his eyes, a swirl of thoughts running through his mind. He figured time could smooth over just about anything. In the end, the past was the past, and now was now. Things once considered scandalous back then might barely raise an eyebrow today. Lost in thought. A soft splat broke the stillness of the hot spring. Not far off, near the wooden partition, a hazy silhouette slowly took shape. The figure stepped barefoot at the water's edge, sending up a few small splashes. Judging by the outline and height, it had to be Shizue Izawa. Ronan lifted his gaze, peering through the drifting steam, a note of confusion in his mind. What's she doing over here? Worth noting, the hot spring was a neat oval in shape, with the wooden partition standing right through the middle, and nothing else blocking the view otherwise. Which meant anyone stepping out of the water on either side could clearly see across to the other. And just as easily, could simply walk from one side to the other. As the figure drew closer, Ronan slowly lowered the cup in his hand. The mist ahead seemed to thin out as the figure approached. Shizue Izawa emerged, a towel white as fresh snow wrapped around her. At the sight, Ronan's brow furrowed, and he asked, "Something wrong?" Shizue Izawa gave a quiet nod, her gaze earnest and sincere. "Divine Lord, you must be exhausted after running around all day. Please, let me wash your back. I know I'm not much use in a lot of things, so I want to help however I can." She hadn't managed to accomplish anything today, really, even her encounter with the slime had ended in failure. If not for Big Sister Frieren's earlier words of caution, she might well have become someone everyone simply forgot about. That was absolutely not the life she wanted. At this, Ronan fell silent for a moment. Wash his back? Was that a standard part of hot spring etiquette? Seemed like it, maybe. But wasn't that usually a thing between men, if he remembered right? He furrowed his brow slightly, thought it over for a few seconds, then landed on a simple, whatever. Whatever the customs were back in Japan, he'd just treat this as an ordinary bath, and not dwell on it too much. With a soft splash, Shizue Izawa stepped into the water, and made her way toward Ronan. Once she reached him, the gentle sound of scrubbing began. Right then, Ronan suddenly remembered something important. He turned his head and asked. "Oh right, Shizue, you said you were fleeing with your mother when you got summoned here. Where was your father?" At Ronan's question, Shizue Izawa's hands froze mid-motion, the towel hovering in midair. But she quickly recovered, offering a strained smile, her eyes dropping unconsciously. "I don't know. Right now I only want to stay with you, Divine Lord. I hate my father. He was forced to go fight a few years back, and there was no word from him at all, right up until the day I was summoned. He's probably dead. Otherwise, there's no way he'd have gone this many years without sending a single letter. Mother hated him too." The bitterness and disappointment in her voice were unmistakable, and hearing the word dead, Ronan understood exactly what that likely meant. A few years before 1945. Part of him wanted to say, "Good riddance," but given the mood right now, there was no reason to invite bad karma over something like that. Ronan nodded and said, "A father like that really isn't worth mourning, then. If you don't want to go back, then don't. Just focus on being yourself, and living your life well from here on out. That's enough." As he spoke, he casually pulled another drink from the space beside him, and sipped it in silence. He didn't say anything like considering her family, though. Not knowing the full picture before was one thing, but now that he knew her father had died in a war like that, saying something like that would only leave a bad taste in his mouth. Better to just treat her as a follower. Besides, if the timeline on her side really was around 1945, then more people like her father were bound to show up eventually. The thought that death for these people might just mean reincarnation, potentially reappearing here, running amok, left Ronan feeling distinctly uneasy. He'd have to find a chance to look into it someday, using Leon's resources. Michael, Lord of Justice, existed for exactly this kind of thing. With that thought, Ronan finished off his drink in a few gulps, fingerprints clearly visible on the cup. Meanwhile, on the other side of the spring, Flam sat half-submerged in the water, blowing idle bubbles, gazing at the wooden partition with a wistful, unsettled look. She genuinely couldn't understand why Shizue Izawa felt absolutely no hesitation about stepping into the men's side of the bath, not the slightest hint of shyness. She had to admit, on this particular front, she'd completely lost. Flam let out a small sigh, turned to look at Siri nearby, and asked, "Master, are our ways of thinking really that outdated? Why is it that Big Brother Ronan and that girl, Shizue Izawa, both seem so completely used to this? It's just so strange." Siri had her eyes closed, resting after a tiring day of battle. At Flam's question, she slowly opened her eyes, gave a brief glance around, and answered evenly. "Nothing strange about it. Our society is over 1,000 years behind theirs. Looking at things from 1,000 years back, with 1,000 years later lens, of course some of it won't make sense to us. But to them, at the time, it was just normal. Try to get used to it." Flam still found it hard to fully accept in her heart, but with her master saying so, there wasn't much else she could do but roll with it. She blew another couple of bubbles, and the air fell into a brief silence. But right then, Flam's gaze drifted toward Frieren nearby, idly playing with the flower petals floating on the water's surface, and something suddenly clicked in her mind. The competition had already been fierce enough as it was, and now there was Shizue Izawa added into the mix too, and she'd already gotten a head start. At the thought, Flam's expression hardened with sudden resolve. Then, in one swift motion, she stood, wrapped her towel around herself briskly, and without a second thought, headed straight for the other side of the wooden partition. Siri watched the whole thing unfold quietly, not bothering to stop her. She simply thought to herself, kids really were like this, letting their feelings run the show far too easily. Good thing she and Frieren were the more level-headed elves of the group. Otherwise, she genuinely couldn't imagine what she'd look like acting on impulse like that. She let out a breath, and the tangled feelings in her chest eased considerably. Closing her eyes again, arms crossed, she leaned back into the corner of the spring, settling in to enjoy the quiet peace of the hot water. underscore 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 underscore. Join my Patreon to read the next chapters without waiting for the daily schedule. Patreon.com/dzeref887. Chapter 80, Chapter 80, The Hero's Egg, The Awakened Hero. 1,388 words. Ramiris, it's been a while. While Ronan and the others were soaking in the hot spring, in a hidden chamber deep within the castle, Leon met with a golden fairy no bigger than the palm of his hand. As the Fairy Queen, one of the 10 great demon lords and the oldest demon lord of all. Ramiris looked at Leon's gentle expression, and memories from long ago came rushing back all at once. She felt, for a moment, as if she'd been pulled back 200 years, right back to when Leon had first become a hero. Ramiris crossed her arms, giving a small, childish huff. It really has been a while, Leon. Didn't expect I'd get to see you again before my reincarnation. What do you need me for? Since Ramiris's reincarnation cycle happened only once every few centuries, and each time, she'd lose the bulk of her memories. The version of her now, just over 200 years old, was still a long way from the notoriously mischievous, childlike personality she'd carry in her next life. Still, traces of that future self lingered even now. She never bothered hiding her feelings toward anyone she disliked. Leon knew this well enough, though it never particularly bothered him. He shook his head lightly. It's precisely because I have something to discuss that I came to find you. Connecting the sealed fairy realm to my own El Dorado, back then, was partly done with exactly this in mind. I've found a new hero. He might just be able to satisfy every requirement you're looking for. The moment he appeared in this world, he killed me, a demon lord. At that, a spark of interest lit up in Ramiris's eyes. She arched a brow, mildly surprised. Killed you? This hero's really that strong? The moment he appeared in this world, what do you mean by that? Don't tell me he's... That's right. Leon explained plainly. He's a visitor from another world. Though this particular visitor is a bit unusual, the world he comes from isn't the Japan we're both familiar with. But there's no question, he holds the power of a hero, granted by the voice of the world. If you're interested in meeting him, I can arrange for the two of you to talk before your reincarnation. By the way, how much longer until it happens? At first, after hearing from Fry that the sealed fairy realm had closed off, Leon had assumed Ramiris didn't have much time left. But seeing her now, she seemed to be doing just fine. Ramiris crossed her arms and nodded. Not too long now. My next incarnation is already forming, maybe another 20-some years. If he really is what you say he is, I'd like to meet him right away. This world hasn't seen a real hero born in over 200 years. At that, something occurred to Ramiris. Hovering in midair, her 2 pairs of wings fluttering, she asked, brow furrowed. By the way, what does he think of us demon lords? He's not going to try killing me the second we meet, is he? If that's the case, forget it. I don't have that impressive recovery ability you demon people have. Though Ramiris could technically be revived even after death, that process took an extraordinarily long time. Only once her next incarnation had fully formed would death actually serve as a release for her, a true rebirth. At this, Leon answered plainly, he shouldn't have much interest in a weak demon lord like you. My subordinates reported that today alone, he brought Fry under his banner, and also subdued the primordial yellow herself. Compared to them, Leon didn't need to finish the thought, the gap in strength spoke for itself. Hearing Frey's name, Ramiris blinked, then nodded, taking it in stride. But the moment the words primordial yellow reached her ears, her expression froze solid. What? She figured she must have misheard. How could the words primordial yellow and hero possibly belong in the same sentence? What kind of power could this man possibly wield to make even a primordial demon willingly submit? Her mind raced. The curiosity burning in Ramiris only grew stronger. she could hardly wait to see this man for herself. As far as she remembered, only the very first hero in history had ever managed something like this, and even then, it had only amounted to peaceful coexistence, never outright submission. Still, excited as she was, Leon told her she'd need to wait a little longer. Since the hero was currently soaking in a hot spring, the formal meeting would likely have to wait until tomorrow. Ramiris had no choice but to swallow her anticipation and rein it in, for now. Through a teleportation circle, she left the castle and returned to the sealed fairy realm. She had some serious primping to do. She wanted to look her absolute best for tomorrow, and refused to let the hero underestimate her in the slightest. Once Ramiris had gone, Leon let out a breath and turned to leave the chamber. He made a mental note to find time soon to meet with that queen of the sorceress dynasty Sarion. That queen was a wind spirit, one of the long-eared race, an elf, in other words, and would likely take an interest in the handful of elves accompanying the hero. Besides, it was about time he reclaimed the weapon and shield he'd once carried during his own days as a hero. A mythical grade longsword and a legendary grade round shield. He'd assumed, once he became a demon lord, he'd never need them again, and so he'd left them sealed away, entrusted to that queen. But now it seemed. With a splash, Ronan slowly rose from the hot spring, feeling refreshed, body and mind both. Behind him, Shizue Izawa and Flam were still splashing around, playing. At first, Flam had been rather put out, rushing to take over scrubbing Ronan's back from Shizue. But somewhere along the way, the two of them had reverted to their true childish selves, and ended up in a full-on water fight. Glancing back at the two of them still playing, Ronan called them over to get out of the water. Once they'd wrapped themselves in dry, soft towels, Ronan used spatial magic to teleport them directly to Leon's stronghold. Cheeks flushed pink, no chill in sight, not that catching a cold was even possible anymore, with their stats modified to resist all illness, but a comfortable warmth was still nice to have regardless. Once dressed, Frieren and Ciri had also finished up in the hot spring, teleporting back to the same location. At dinner, Ronan received word that a demon lord would be coming to meet him the next day. A demon lord? Ronan's brow furrowed, a flicker of confusion. A moment later, learning it was the fairy queen, the very guide to becoming a true hero, he nodded and asked. I see. What does she want with me? It concerns your becoming a true hero. Leon answered seriously, knife and fork in hand. Only a hero chosen by the spirit of light can be considered a true hero, and within such a hero's body, a hero's egg will form. One day, when that egg finally cracks open, you'll become an awakened hero. At that point, an entirely new ultimate skill will emerge within you. My own Metatron, Lord of Purity, came into being exactly this way. Oh? Hearing Leon's answer, Ronan's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of interest crossing them. After all, when it came to raw power, he'd never once thought there was such a thing as too much. Sure, mental domination was already plenty powerful on its own, but to him, it was really nothing more than a beefed-up version of mind control magic. Whether he had it or not made little practical difference. So might as well give it a shot. If it worked, great. If not, the plan carried on regardless. With that thought, Ronan settled his mind, waiting quietly for tomorrow's meeting with the fairy queen. Underscore 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 underscore. Join my Patreon to read the next chapters without waiting for the daily schedule. Patreon.com/dzeref887. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.